Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Get ready, because I've got some chilling stories lined up for you. Before we dive in, if you're enjoying the atmosphere here, hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel would really mean a lot. Thank you. Now settle in, get cozy, and let's get started. Elias sought the forest for silence, but the silence of these ancient Swedish woods was not entirely peaceful. It was a silence thick with unspoken things, a silence that felt less like solace and more like waiting. He sought the solace of trees older than memory, but these trees had witnessed centuries of decay and rebirth, of hidden processes unfolding in the darkness, and their silence held the weight of that ancient, indifferent knowledge. He sought the quietude that cities could never offer, but this forest offered quietude of a different kind, a stillness that felt aware, expectant, almost predatory. It was late October. The birches stood skeletal against the pewter sky, their leaves long surrendered to the wind and the damp earth. Pines, stoic and dark green, dominated the landscape, their needles carpeting the forest floor in a thick, springy layer that muffled every footstep. The air was cold, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and decaying leaves and the pervasive, earthy aroma of damp soil and something else, something fungal. The forest floor was a tapestry of mushrooms, crimson caps pushing through the leaf litter, pale toadstools clinging to rotting logs, bracket fungi like shells on ancient tree trunks, and something else, something unseen, something stirring beneath the leaves, a hidden network you could almost feel vibrating beneath your feet, a silent, unseen pulse. Fungi thrived in this damp, decaying world, unseen networks spreading beneath the surface, a hidden kingdom pulsing with unseen life. Elias, usually attuned to the subtle language of the woods, barely noticed them, preoccupied with his own weary thoughts. He hiked deeper, following a barely discernible trail that wound through the dense woods, further and further from any sign of human presence. The forest grew quieter, the sunlight filtering through the dense canopy in fractured shafts, painting the undergrowth in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The wind whispered secrets through the pines, secrets in a language older than words, secrets that spoke of cycles of decay and rebirth, of hidden processes unfolding beneath the surface of the visible world. And there was a scent, a pervasive, underlying scent that mingled with the damp earth and pine needles, a musky, earthy aroma, rich and fertile, but also unsettling. Something wrong. Something that didn't belong in the clean, natural scent of the forest. Something wilder than any animal, yes, but also tainted, unclean, ancient. Something musky, but not like animal musk, not like deer or bear or fox. Something off. Something that prickles at my senses and raises the hairs on my arms. Something unnatural. He veered off the trail, drawn by an instinct he couldn't name, pushing through a thicket of ferns into a small, hidden hollow. The air here was noticeably colder, damper, heavier, and the fungal scent was overpowering, almost cloying, a sickly, sweet, decaying aroma that clung to the back of your throat and made your stomach churn, a scent that felt wrong, unnatural, almost tainted. Before him, nestled in a shallow depression in the earth, was a grotto, not a deep cave, more like a scooped-out hollow beneath a tangle of exposed tree roots and moss-draped rocks. But it was what grew within the grotto that caught his breath. Fungi, an impossible profusion of fungi, more than he had ever seen in one place. They carpeted the grotto floor, clung to the damp rock walls, sprouted from the exposed roots like grotesque ornaments. They were every shape, size, and color imaginable, luminous white clusters like frozen coral, fleshy crimson shells, bulbous purple forms that pulse with faint, internal light, delicate, lace-like structures of impossible fragility, and thick, core-like strands that snaked across the earth like living veins. And the smell, it was intoxicating, overwhelming, Rich, earthy, musky, but with an undercurrent of something sickly sweet, something decaying, something almost carnal, a taint of fertility that both drew you in and repelled you in the same breath. Spores hung heavy in the air, a visible mist in the damp stillness of the grotto, catching the fractured sunlight in shimmering motes. He stepped closer, drawn by a morbid fascination, a reckless curiosity overriding his nascent unease. He wanted to see them up close, to touch them, to understand this impossible fungal garden. He leaned into the grotto, inhaling deeply, drawn in by the overwhelming scent, by the strange, hypnotic beauty of the fungal bloom. And as he breathed, as he filled his lungs with the damp, spore-laden air, he felt a subtle, almost imperceptible tickle in his throat, a faint, earthy taste on his tongue, a fleeting sensation like something settling deep within him. He didn't know it then, but in that breath, in that moment of reckless curiosity, he had crossed the threshold. He had taken in not just air, but a seed of something ancient, something alien, something that would soon take root and bloom within him, twisting his body, consuming his mind, transforming him into something other. He had inhaled the spores of the Mycelial Veil. The day after, Elias felt off, a lingering fatigue, easily dismissed as hiking weariness. 2 days later, the fatigue was heavier, more persistent, and a dull headache had settled behind his eyes. By the 3rd day, the metallic taste appeared, fleeting but unsettling, and his dreams began, vivid, strange, easily forgotten upon waking, but leaving a residue of unease, a sense of something wrong lingering in his mind. It was subtle, insidious, a creeping unease rather than a sudden assault. But with each passing day, the symptoms intensified, the unease deepened, and the forest, in his memory, began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a source. Days later, back in his isolated cabin at the edge of the forest, Elias began to feel truly unwell. A persistent fatigue clung to him like a shroud, heavier than any post-hike weariness he had ever known, dragging at his limbs, clouding his mind. Headaches throbbed behind his eyes, dull and insistent, a constant, low-level agony. He noticed a strange metallic taste in his mouth, lingering even after meals, a taste that seemed to deepen with each passing day, becoming almost earthy, like soil and decay. In his dreams they became vivid, unsettling, no longer easily forgotten, but haunting his waking hours, filled with increasingly disturbing images of twisting fungal networks, of tendrils reaching through dark earth, of vast, silent intelligences pulsing beneath the forest floor, of eyes open within the mushrooms, watching him from the darkness. He dismissed these symptoms less easily now, the rationalizations wearing thin, the whispers of unease growing louder, more insistent. He was a man of reason, after all, a man who trusted in logic and dismissed the whispers of unease as mere fancy. But even reason began to falter in the face of this creeping, inexplicable illness. But the symptoms persisted, intensified relentlessly. Muscle twitches began, no longer subtle, but sharp, involuntary spasms in his limbs that startled him awake at night, leaving him trembling and breathless. His skin became strangely sensitive, prickling and itching for no apparent reason, an almost unbearable crawling sensation beneath the surface. He developed cravings for unusual foods, raw mushrooms he found in the increasingly shadowed corners of the forest, decaying fruit he'd normally avoid with disgust, a strange, almost desperate hunger for earthy, damp flavors, for the taste of soil and decay and the musky sweetness of the fungal bloom. His behavior shifted subtly at first, almost imperceptibly, then more noticeably, alarmingly. He became more withdrawn, more profoundly solitary, neglecting even basic self-care, spending hours staring blankly into the darkening woods, listening to the wind whisper secrets through the pines, feeling an inexplicable pull, a yearning that resonated deep within his bones, a primal urge to return to the depths of the forest, to the damp earth, to the fungal darkness. He neglected his usual routines, forgot appointments, lost track of time in a haze of fatigue, disorientation, and a growing, nameless dread. One evening, staring at his reflection in the cabin window, the flickering lamplight casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and shift like living things across his gaunt face, he saw it undeniably, horrifyingly. Not just the deepening fatigue etched in stark lines around his hollow eyes, not just the unnatural pallor of his skin, but something else, something growing. A subtle change in the complexion, a faint, almost imperceptible mottling, a pale, web-like pattern spreading beneath the surface of his skin, visible now even in the dim light, like mycelium taking root beneath his flesh. He lifted a trembling hand to his face, his fingers tracing the strange, branching texture. Skin that felt strangely cool to the touch, colder than normal, disturbingly smooth, almost waxy, like the cap of a pale mushroom. And the fungal scent, faint before, now emanated from him, from his very skin, a sickly sweet, decaying aroma that clung to his nostrils and made his stomach churn. A cold dread washed over him, not just a feeling, but a physical sensation, like icy water flooding his veins, a chilling certainty that something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong, that he was no longer just unwell, but infected, violated, consumed from within. He was losing control, not just of his body, but of his very self. His body was changing, yes, but it was more than mere physical illness. It was a transformation, and not in a natural way, not in any way human. The transformation accelerated with terrifying speed after that night. The muscle twitches intensified into violent, convulsive spasms, contorted his limbs in unnatural, grotesque angles, throwing him from his bed, leaving him gasping and trembling on the floor. Fungal growths began to erupt on his skin with horrifying rapidity. Small, pale bumps blossoming into fleshy protrusions in hours, then larger, bulbous masses. Clusters of white and gray tissue pushing through his pores, branching and spreading like grotesque, living ornaments, like parasitic blooms erupting from his flesh. His skin texture changed completely, dramatically, becoming pale, clammy, almost translucent in places, stretched thin over the burgeoning fungal structures beneath, revealing the web-like network of mycelium spreading beneath like a living roadmap of his destruction. His human features seemed to blur and distort, melting away like wax in a fire, his eyes becoming strangely vacant, milky, unfocused, his mouth twisting into a slack, unresponsive shape, his jaw lengthening, his teeth sharpening, his face contorting into something other. His movements became jerky, puppet-like, limbs flailing, gait stumbling, coordination failing completely. His body no longer obeying commands of his fading will, but twitching and jerking to the dictates of something alien growing within. His mind fractured into shards, his thoughts fragmented and incoherent, his memories dissolving like smoke, his very sense of self eroding, fading, dying. Moments of lucidity became rarer, weaker, more fleeting, like sparks in a gathering darkness. Brief flashes of screaming horror as he recognized the monstrous, fungal parody his body had become, as he glimpsed his reflection in a darkened window, a distorted, fungal thing staring back with vacant, inhuman eyes, a grotesque mockery of the man he once was. But these moments of awareness were quickly extinguished, swallowed by the rising, all-consuming tide of fungal dominance, by the alien will that now pulsed within him, driving him, controlling him, erasing him. He felt himself being overwritten, his consciousness fading into a distant echo, his identity dissolving into fungal network, replaced by something cold, something alien, something mycelial, something ancient and hungry and wrong. The burning sensation, that initial point of contact, that first seed of infection in his hand, intensified, became all-consuming, radiating outwards, no longer just pain but transformation, unnatural metamorphosis. Spreading up his arm like wildfire under his skin, a searing, throbbing agony that felt like molten metal in his veins, like bone and muscle and flesh itself was rearranging itself from the inside out in a way that was fundamentally, horrifically wrong, tainted by something unclean, something inhuman, something ancient. His skin crawled with frantic, internal itching, a desperate, futile urge to tear himself open, to shed this human form that was suddenly, violently, irrevocably becoming something else, something monstrous, something not me, something of the mycelial veil, something of the fungus. His senses exploded, not with natural sharpness, but with distortion, with corruption, with the taint of something unnatural, something otherworldly. Sharpened, yes, but beyond sharpness, into a painful, overwhelming distortion that felt inhuman, bestial, wrong, tainted. Smells became overpowering, overwhelmingly, nauseatingly, sickeningly sweet and decaying. The fungal musk now a cloying, inescapable stench that seemed to emanate from within him, from his very pores, a constant, suffocating reminder of the fungal takeover, of the alien presence blooming within his flesh. Sounds grated on his raw nerves. Every rustle of leaves outside the cabin, every snap of twig underfoot, every creak of the wooden structure amplified into a deafening, agonizing cacophony, a relentless assault on his fractured senses. Sight blurred and warped, the familiar world around him twisting into grotesque, fungal shapes, colors shifting into unnatural, sickly hues, shadows deepening into hungry, living voids that seemed to watch him, to wait for him, to claim him. He was no longer Elias, not in any meaningful sense. The fungus had taken complete root, had spread its unseen tendrils through every fiber of his being, had claimed him utterly as a vessel, a host, a tool, a mere component in its ancient, relentless life cycle. His human will was extinguished, his consciousness a fading ember, replaced entirely by a primal, fungal imperative, to propagate, to spread, to bloom, to consume and transform. Driven by this alien purpose, Elias, or the fungal thing that now wore his shape, stumbled out of the cabin, back into the darkening, indifferent forest. He moved with a jerky, unnatural, fungal gait, his body contorted into grotesque shapes, fungal growths erupting from the skin in pulsating waves, spores dusting the chilling air around him with every labored, rasping breath. He was drawn deeper and deeper into the woods, towards the dampest, darkest, most fertile places, towards the silent, unseen heart of the fungal network that now pulsed within him, as him, was him. He climbed, driven by an instinct not his own, an ancient fungal compulsion, his fungal twisted limbs finding unnatural purchase on the rough, cold bark of ancient, indifferent trees, ascending relentlessly towards a darkening canopy, towards a fading, dying light of the autumn sky. He sought height elevation, a vantage point, not for human vision, but for fungal dispersal, to release his burden, to cast his fungal seed upon the wind, to spread the infection, to claim new hosts, to perpetuate the ancient cycle of decay and rebirth. He reached a high exposed branch, swaying precariously in the chilling wind, the forest floor a dizzying, irrelevant distance below. He clung there, his fungal body trembling with a cold, alien purpose, his vacant, milky eyes staring out blindly at the darkening, indifferent woods, no longer seeing the fading beauty of the forest, but only the vast, unseen potential for propagation, for fungal expansion, for silent, inevitable mycelial dominion. And then from his body, from the grotesque fungal growths that now encased and defined him, from the very pores of his pale, stretched, fungal skin, a fine, pale, living mist began to erupt, slowly at first, then in a billowing cloud that enveloped him entirely, obscuring his monstrous shape, blurring the line between fungal growth and forest air. Spores, millions upon countless millions of microscopic, living spores, released into the chilling wind, carried on the tainted autumn breeze, drifting silently down to the darkening, indifferent forest, settling on fallen leaves, on rough bark on the damp, receptive earth below, seeking new hosts, new victims, new vessels of Mycelial Veil, perpetuating the ancient, unstoppable cycle. Elias, or what had once been Elias, remained perched high in the swaying branches, a grotesque, fungal effigy silhouetted against the dying light, a silent, chilling monument to transformation, to irreversible loss, to the terrifying, indifferent power of nature to consume and repurpose, to the bleak, fungal truth that in the ancient, uncaring heart of the wilderness, humanity is but a fleeting, fragile bloom, easily overtaken, easily replaced, easily consumed. And the forest, ancient and silent, breathed in the spores and waited patiently, inevitably, for the next host to stumble unknowing into its silent, fungal embrace. I came to these woods to lose myself. That's the honest truth of it, to deliberately get lost. Not in a reckless way, not dangerously, but to step off the map for a while, to silence the noise of the city, the endless demands, the constant hum of everything. I needed the quiet, the anonymity of the trees, the feeling of being small, insignificant, swallowed up by something ancient and indifferent. It's an old forest, this one, older than the town that edges its borders, older, I suspect, than most of the stories they tell in town. The trees are towering, their branches interlace overhead, blocking out much of the sky, even in the late afternoon. The air here is different, cooler, damper, smelling of moss and decaying leaves, a scent of something primeval. Sunlight filters down in fractured shafts, illuminating patches of ferns and tangled undergrowth, leaving the deeper woods in perpetual shadow. I've been walking for hours, deliberately without a compass, without a map, just following faint deer trails and instinct deeper and deeper into the woods. The sound of the road, the distant drone of traffic, faded long ago. Now, it's just the rustle of leaves underfoot, the sigh of the wind high in the branches, the occasional sharp cry of a hawk circling unseen overhead. A sense of peace, yes, but also something else, something heavier, something watchful. It was hours and maybe 3, maybe more when I first noticed it. Just a scratch on a tree trunk at eye level, a thin, jagged line cutting through the rough bark. I glanced at it as I passed, barely registering it. Just a tree damaged by weather, by animals, by time. Nothing unusual in an old forest. But then, a little further on, another tree, and another scratch, similar to the first, but not quite random. This one seemed to have a slight curve to it, almost intentional. Again, I dismissed it. Forests are full of strange patterns, natural damage that can look like anything you want it to. Pareidolia, the mind finding patterns where none exist. But then they started appearing more frequently. Markings on tree after tree, always at roughly the same height, always on the side of the trunk facing the trail. And they were becoming less random, less like scratches, more like symbols. Simple at first, straight lines, angled cuts, small circles. But they were definitely there. Deliberate, not just natural damage. I stopped, examining one more closely. A spiral, etched into the bark, deeper than any natural scratch. It was clean, precise, almost carved, and around it, smaller lines radiating outwards, like a stylized sun, or something else, something older, something less familiar. A chill started to creep in, despite the late summer warmth. It wasn't just the markings themselves. It was a feeling they created, a sense of communication, as if the trees themselves were trying to tell me something, or warn me, or mark me. I started to pay closer attention, examining each marked tree as I passed. The symbols became more complex, more varied. Spirals, yes, but also zigzag lines, triangles, strange, angular shapes that seemed to shift and change in the dappled light. Some looked almost glyph-like, ancient, like a language I didn't recognize, but felt I should understand. And then I saw it, a cluster of trees, standing close together, and each one covered in markings, more elaborate than any I'd seen before. Intricate patterns, weaving across the bark, almost covering the entire trunk in symbols. It was overwhelming, too much to take in at once, like stumbling upon an ancient, forgotten script carved into the living wood. And then I saw it, on the central tree of the cluster, at eye level, a single marking different from all the others, simpler but more direct, a circle with a single line pointing directly outwards straight at me like an eye or a warning finger pointing right at me. In that moment, the feeling became overwhelming, not just unease, but a sudden sharp spike of fear. I felt seen, observed, judged by the trees themselves, by the forest. The markings weren't random. They were intentional. They were for me. The forest was aware, and it was communicating. But what was it saying? And was it welcoming me or warning me away? I didn't wait to decipher message. I didn't want to understand. The feeling of being watched, of being marked, was too strong, too unsettling. I turned and started to walk back the way I'd come, retracing my steps, trying to put distance between myself and those marked trees, and the feeling of unseen eyes. The forest path seemed different now, less peaceful, more watchful. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper. I glanced back, constantly, half expecting to see the trees themselves moving, shifting, following me. Of course they weren't. Trees don't move, do they? But the markings remained in my mind, etched as deeply as they were carved into bark. A language I couldn't read, but felt I understood on some primal level. A message from the forest. And I couldn't shake the feeling that, even as I walked away, deeper into the woods, amongst the unmarked trees, the forest was still watching, still marking, and still waiting. It all started when I stumbled upon a faded map tucked away in an old book at my grandmother's house. The map depicted a path leading to a place that was marked only with a small, ominous X. Intrigued, I decided to follow it, believing it would lead me to an adventure. But what I found instead was a nightmare lurking in the shadows. After an hour hiking through thick underbrush and tangled roots, I emerged into a clearing. And there it was, the forgotten graveyard. The air felt heavy, cloying with the scent of decay and damp earth. Tombstones, cracked and leaning at odd angles, jutted out of the ground like broken teeth. Moss clung to the stones, obscuring names and dates, while twisted trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky. I stepped inside, the crunch of dried leaves underfoot breaking the oppressive silence. A chill ran down my spine, and I glanced around, feeling as though unseen eyes were watching me. The graveyard was eerily still, but an unsettling energy hung in the air, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. As I wandered deeper into the graveyard, I noticed one tombstone that stood apart from the rest. It was larger, more ornate, and the inscription was clearer than the others. It read, "Here lies Margaret, beloved daughter, taken too soon." A strange sense of familiarity washed over me, as if I had known her in another life. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper carried on the wind. "Help me!" The voice was faint and distant, but it sent shivers coursing through my body. I turned to leave, but the urge to uncover the source of the voice pulled me closer to Margaret's grave. I knelt beside the tombstone, brushing away the moss that had obscured it. As I did, I noticed a small, rusted locket half buried in the dirt. My heart raced with excitement and dread. I picked it up, feeling its cold metal against my skin, and I opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, Margaret, I presumed, and a man whose face was obscured. "Please," the whisper grew stronger, more insistent. "You must help me." My breath hitched in my throat. I asked, "Help you with what?" My voice trembling as I scanned the graveyard, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "Find the truth," the voice urged. "Uncover my story and I will be free." I looked around, half expecting to see someone emerge in the trees, but the graveyard remained silent, save for the rustling leaves. Compelled by the voice, I decided to dig deeper. I had come this far. Surely I could uncover the mystery of this forgotten graveyard. As I began to dig around the base of the tombstone, the ground felt soft and loose beneath my fingers. I unearthed fragments of wood and metal, remnants of something buried long ago. My heart raced as I uncovered an old, decaying box, locked tight. The whispers grew louder, urging me on. "Open it." I fumbled through the dirt for something to pry it open, finally using a rock to force the lid. With a loud crack, the box sprang open, revealing a collection of letters, yellowed with age. I began to read, heart pounding with every word. The letters spoke of a forbidden love affair between Margaret and the man in the photograph, someone from a family that had disapproved of their union. They had planned to run away together, but then tragedy struck. Margaret's family had found out, and in a fit of rage, they had taken her life to protect their honor. The final letter sent chills down my spine. It was a warning from Margaret to her lover, warning him to stay away, lest he suffer the same fate. It was clear she had been murdered, her life taken by the very people who were supposed to love her. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, dread coiling in my stomach, and saw a shadow standing at the edge of the graveyard. The figure was tall and cloaked in darkness, its features indistinguishable. "You shouldn't have come here," it growled, its voice low and menacing. "You've disturbed the dead." I stumbled back, clutching the letters to my chest as fear gripped me. I stammered, I was just trying to help," my voice trembling. "Help? You think you can help her?" the shadow hissed, stepping closer. "You will pay for your meddling." The whispers grew frantic, swirling around me like a storm. "Run!" they screamed in unison. "You must leave." I turned and bolted, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I sprinted through the graveyard, the cold breath of the shadow hot on my back. I could feel its presence closing in, the darkness reaching out, trying to ensnare me. As I burst through the entrance, the whispers faded, but the shadow loomed just outside, its eyes burning with rage. "You cannot escape what you have awakened," it roared. I didn't look back. I raced through the woods, branches clawing at me as I pushed deeper into the foliage. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt like I was being hunted, the very essence of the graveyard pursuing me. Finally, I emerged onto the road, gasping for breath. I glanced back, heart racing, but the shadow was gone, leaving only the echo of its wrath behind. I stumbled home, the locket still clutched in my hand, its cold metal a reminder of the horrors I had unearthed. That night, I lay in bed, unable to shake the feeling that I had not escaped the graveyard unscathed. The whispers haunted my dreams, and I could almost hear Margaret's voice calling out to me, forever trapped in the shadows of Oakwood Manor. Days turned into weeks, but the weight of the graveyard lingered on my soul. I had uncovered the truth of Margaret's tragic end, but in doing so, I had awakened something dark and ancient. The whispers never ceased, echoing my mind, a reminder of the forgotten graveyard that would forever haunt my thoughts. Evening patrol, just before full dark. The best time to be in the park, in a way. The daytime crowds, with their noise and their litter and their careless disregard, are finally gone, vanished back to the world of concrete and noise and light pollution. The trails are empty, reclaimed by the silence. And the woods, they settle, they breathe, they become themselves again. Wilder, quieter, closer to their true nature, ancient and unknowable. The air cools rapidly, drawing the heat from the earth. The shadows lengthen into grasping claws, and the sounds of forest shift, deepen, become more primal. The cheerful, daytime chirping of birds fades into an uneasy silence, replaced by the deeper, more resonant calls of owls hunting in the twilight. The rustling of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth with deliberate purpose, the whisper of the wind to the ancient trees, carrying scents of damp earth and decaying leaves and pine needles, and something else. Something wilder than any animal, something ancient and unclean, something musky. I'm Ranger Elias Thorne, custodian of Blackwood National Park. Been patrolling these woods for 15 years, a silent guardian in a green and shadowed realm. Know these woods like the back of my own hand, better than my own home. Every trail, every creek, every hidden ridge, every secret clearing, every ancient tree standing sentinel in the deepening twilight. Know the animals too, or thought I did. The deer, graceful and skittish, the bears, lumbering and predictable, the foxes, sly and elusive, the bobcats, silent shadows in the undergrowth, even the occasional mountain lion that drifts down from the higher peaks, a ghost in the wilderness. Know their tracks, their calls, their habits, their territories. Know the rhythm of the woods, the pulse of the wild, the heartbeat of nature itself. Or, I thought I did. I thought I knew. Tonight, I'm checking the Eastern Perimeter Trail, a long, lonely loop that winds along the park boundary, making sure the faded boundary markers are still standing, still visible, still holding back the encroaching wildness, making sure no careless hikers have wandered off trail after dark, straying into places they should not be. Routine, just routine. Another walk in the woods, another silent patrol in the gathering darkness. But lately there's been a shift, a subtle tremor in the balance of things. A feeling in the woods, a sense of unease that prickles at my senses, raises the hairs on my arms, tightens my chest with an inexplicable dread. Animals acting skittish, their usual patterns disrupted, trails feeling watched, even in broad daylight, a sense of unseen eyes following my every step. Something different is in the woods. Something I can't quite name, can't quite place, can't quite explain. Something unsettling. something deeply, instinctively out of place in the familiar, comforting rhythm of the park. Something wrong. The sun is almost completely gone now, swallowed by the horizon, sinking below the jagged ridge line, bleeding the last light from the sky, painting the western sky in violent streaks of fading orange and bruised, darkening purple, the colors of blood and shadow. The shadows are deepening with unnatural speed, no longer just lengthening, but solidifying, swallowing the trails whole, blurring the edges of the woods until familiar paths become indistinct, disorienting, and the trees themselves transform into looming, monstrous shapes against the fading light, silent witnesses to something unseen and ancient stirring in the darkness. The air is getting colder with every passing moment, carrying a damp, bone-deep chill that seeps into my clothes, into my skin, into my very bones, leaving me shivering despite the exertion of the hike. The forest sounds are changing again, deepening, becoming more resonant, more primal, more hungry. The rustling in the undergrowth is no longer just random movement. It's constant, deliberate, surrounding me on all sides. Unseen presences pacing just beyond the edge of the trail, too close, too insistent, too focused. And that musky scent, that wild, animalistic odor, it's not just stronger now. It's almost overpowering, thick in the air, clinging to my clothes, permeating the very air I breathe, coating my tongue with a raw, feral taste that makes my stomach clench, my senses sharpened to a painful degree, my instincts awaken with primal urgency I haven't felt since childhood, a deep, atavistic fear rising from the base of my spine. Something is hunting in these woods tonight, and I am no longer certain that I am the hunter. I round a sharp bend in the trail, pushing through a claustrophobic thicket of low-hanging branches that scrape against my face and snag at my uniform. And that's when it happens. Suddenly, violently, without the slightest warning, the culmination of all the growing unease, all the subtle dread, all the unspoken fear. A rustle in the undergrowth just beside the trail, not random, not animal, but deliberate, focused, louder, closer than anything I've heard so far. A sound of purposeful movement in the shadows. A sharp, distinct snapping twig, too loud, too close, too intentional. A heavy, guttural snort. Not animal, but bestial. A guttural expulsion of air that carries the weight of something ancient and unclean. And then something lunges out of the shadows, from the heart of the deepening darkness. Fast as striking snake, silent as death itself, unseen in the rapidly fading light. A blur of motion and shadow and primal intent. Pain. Not just pain, but agony. Sharp, burning, searing. Tearing pain erupts on my hand, my left hand, just below the wrist, as if white-hot claws have raked across my flesh, tearing muscle and sinew and bone. A sudden, agonizing flash of white-hot agony that makes me gasp, a strangled cry torn from my throat. Stumble back blindly, losing my footing on the uneven, root-tangled trail, falling heavily to my knees. I scramble backwards, scrambling away from the unseen attacker, adrenaline flooding my system, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, breath catching in ragged gasps, expecting, needing to see what? A bear in rage, a rabid bobcat, a pack of feral dogs, a cornered mountain lion, something attacking me, yes, but something visible, something identifiable, something natural, something I can fight, something I can understand, something normal. But there's nothing there, just shadows, deepening, swirling shadows pooling under the ancient trees, clinging to the undergrowth, obscuring everything beyond the reach of my trembling flashlight beam. Just silence, oppressive, expectant silence, broken only by my own ragged, panicked breathing, the frantic, erratic pounding of my heart in my ears, the rustling leaves that now sound like whispers in the darkness, the distant, mournful calls of owls, now seeming to mock my fear, the unsettling primal sounds of the forest at dusk, now imbued with malevolent intent. Nothing visible, no sign of an attacker, nothing to explain the sudden, searing, tearing pain in my hand. Nothing to explain the chilling feeling of violation, of something unseen and unknown brushing against me in the deepening darkness, leaving behind not just pain, but a sense of contamination. I raised my left hand, slowly, cautiously, as if expecting to find it changed already, my flashlight beam shaking violently in my suddenly numb grip, and shine it down, illuminating the source of the agony. My hand, it's bleeding profusely. Yes, a thick, viscous trickle of dark, almost black blood welling up, pouring out from what? A scratch? A bite? A tear in the flesh? It's hard to see clearly in the fading, distorted light. Hard to tell exactly what manner wound caused this agonizing injury, this sudden, shocking violation of my flesh. 3 parallel lines, not scratches, not bites, but rakes in the skin, shallow yet impossibly deep, tearing through skin and muscle, welling with dark, viscous blood, raked savagely across the back of my hand, just below my wrist, as if something with impossibly sharp claws had deliberately, precisely scored my flesh. Like claws, yes, but not animal claws. Not claws I recognize from any creature of this forest. Small claws, yes, but wickedly sharp, unnaturally precise, disturbingly intentional. Claws that felt tainted, unclean, wrong. Claws that left behind not just pain, but a cold, spreading infection of the soul. I fumble for my first aid kit, my hands clumsy, shaking, unresponsive, my mind racing, trying to catch up with the impossible reality of what just happened, trying to rationalize the irrational, trying to deny the creeping terror that threatens to overwhelm my reason. I clean the wound as best I can with trembling fingers, the antiseptic stinging like acid in the raw flesh, disinfect it with shaking hands, bandage it tightly with trembling, clumsy movements, trying desperately to ignore the lingering, throbbing, burning sensation that seems to be spreading outwards from the wound, trying to rationalize the inexplicable attack, trying to convince myself that it was just a branch, just a thorn bush, just a wild animal, just anything but what my instincts, my senses, my very blood is screaming at me is the truth. Must have been a branch. Yes, a low-hanging, thorn-covered branch. Scratched myself in the fading light. Startled by a deer, maybe. Imagine the rest, the guttural sound, the unseen attacker, the feeling of wrongness, just fatigue, just nerves frayed to breaking point, just the woods playing elaborate, cruel tricks in the gathering dusk. That's all. It has to be. There is no other explanation. There cannot be another explanation. Isn't there? I finish bandaging my hand, the white bandage stark and obscene against the darkening forest, pack up the useless first aid kit, my movement stiff, mechanical, unresponsive to my will, and stand up slowly, cautiously, swaying slightly on my feet, forcing myself to shake off the encroaching paralysis of fear, to dismiss the irrational, primal terror that's starting to claw its way into my conscious mind. Just a scratch, just a scare, nothing to be worried about, nothing to fear. Routine patrol. Still have to finish my rounds, check the remaining boundary markers, get back to the station before full, suffocating dark descends and the woods become truly, irrevocably unclean. Just routine. Just keep moving. Just ignore the feeling. Just run. I force myself to start walking again, resuming my patrol with a forced, unnatural steadiness. Each step heavy, leaden, echoing too loudly in the oppressive silence, trying to outpace the growing dread, to outrun the encroaching darkness, to outlogic the primal terror that is now a living thing inside me, coiling in my gut, freezing my blood, whispering unspeakable horrors in the back of my mind. Forcing my pace to be steady, deliberate, normal, trying desperately to ignore the throbbing, burning, changing pain in my hand. Try to ignore the frantic, internal itching that crawls across my skin. Try to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the certainty of unseen eyes watching from the shadows, the feeling of being hunted, the unsettling, wrong sounds of the forest closing in around me like grasping claws as the last vestiges of light bleed from the sky and the woods descend into full, impenetrable, predatory darkness. Just routine. Just keep going. Just ignore the feeling. Just survive. Just escape. But the feeling, it doesn't fade, doesn't diminish, doesn't even waver for a moment. It intensifies with every step I take further into darkness. Every breath I draw that fills my lungs with the tainted, musky air. Every heartbeat that pumps the changing blood through my veins. The scratch on my hand is not just burning anymore. It's consuming me. A deep, throbbing, searing, metamorphic agony that feels like fire in my veins, like molten lead flowing through my arteries, like bone and muscle and flesh itself is rearranging itself, twisting itself, becoming something else from the inside out, something other. My skin crawls with frantic, internal itching, a desperate, uncontrollable urge to tear myself open, to rip away this human skin, to shed this fragile, failing human form that is suddenly, violently, irrevocably becoming wrong. And the forest sounds, they're not just closer now. They're everywhere, surrounding me, engulfing me, pressing it on me from all sides, a cacophony of unnatural noise that threatens to shatter my sanity. The rustling in the undergrowth is constant, a living, breathing wall of sound, unseen presences moving just beyond the edge of my vision, just beyond the reach of my pathetic flashlight beam, too close, too deliberate, too focused, circling me, hurting me, driving me deeper into the heart of the darkness. And that musky scent, it's not just overpowering now. It's suffocating, nauseating, clinging to my clothes, permeating my skin, coating my mouth, filling my lungs, choking me with its raw, animalistic stench, a feral reek that speaks of blood and bone and something ancient and unclean, something predatory, something inhuman. And then cutting through the cacophony of distorted forest sounds, overriding the pounding of my heart, the rasping of my breath, the frantic whispers of my fear, I hear it again, that sound from before, that guttural snort, closer this time, much closer, no longer distant, but beside me, just off the trail, in the suffocating shadows, a sound that vibrates in my chest, that resonates in my bones, that chills me to the very core of my soul. And something else, a new sound, more unsettling still, a low bleating, not just a goat bleat, but something twisted, mocking, a sound that echoes with unnatural resonance through trees, a bleat that grates on the soul, that speaks of mockery and malice, and something ancient and wrong in the heart of the woods. Faint, distant no longer, but close now, chillingly close, undeniably a goat, a twisted goat, a wrong goat. In Blackwood National Park, there are no goats in Blackwood National Park. Not wild goats, not domestic goats, not any goats. Impossible, unnatural, wrong, deeply, terrifyingly, unforgivably wrong. And the burning in my hand intensifies. The itching spreads. The transformation accelerates. I stop again, stumbling, falling, collapsing to my knees on a root-tangled trail, breath sawing in and out of my lungs in ragged, panicked gasps, flashlight beams swinging wildly, casting frantic, useless circles of light that reveal nothing but deepening shadows and grasping branches, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped animal trying to escape its cage, blood roaring in my ears, vision blurring, distorting, senses screaming in protest. The forest sounds, they seem to vanish completely, swallowed by an oppressive, distorted silence that is more terrifying than any sound, a silence that feels pregnant, expectant, predatory, except for that faint, unsettling, twisted bleating, now closer, much closer, echoing with unnatural resonance through trees, a sound that chills the blood, that curdles the soul, that speaks of mockery and malice and ancient, unknowable evil. Closer now, impossibly close, impossibly clear. And a new sound, more terrifying still in its deliberate, rhythmic approach. A rhythmic, something moving to the undergrowth, no longer unseen, no longer hidden, but coming, heavy, deliberate, relentless, snapping twigs like dry bones, crushing leaves underfoot with unnatural weight, disturbing the stillness of the forest floor with a power that speaks of something ancient and wrong. Footsteps? No. Too heavy, too rhythmic, too purposeful, too inhuman. More like hooves, cloven hooves, clicking and scraping on the unseen stones beneath the leaf litter, a sound that chills me to the bone, that promises pain and violation, and something far worse than death. Hooves? In the woods? In the darkness? In Blackwood National Park? Goats? No, never. Impossible. Unthinkable. And yet, the bleating, twisted and mocking, echoing to the trees the heavy, rhythmic, cloven footsteps approaching to the undergrowth, promising something unimaginable, the guttural snort, bestial and unclean, vibrating the very air, the musky scent, overpowering, nauseating, tainted with something ancient and wrong, the burning, changing, agonizing scratch on my hand, now spreading like wildfire through my veins, transforming me from the inside out. It's all wrong. Deeply, terrifyingly, unforgivably wrong. And the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, of being consumed, of being utterly, irrevocably lost is no longer just a feeling. It's an absolute, undeniable certainty. Something is out there. No, not out there. Here, in the woods, in the darkness, moving toward me with deliberate, measured steps, with unnatural, cloven hooves, with a twisted, mocking bleat that chills the soul, making those unsettling, inhuman sounds, leaving that overpowering, tainted, predatory scent. And it's not natural. It's not animal. It's not of this world. It's something else, something other, something ancient and unclean, something unwelcome, something coming for me, to claim me, to consume me, to transform me, and there is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no escape from the encroaching darkness, from the suffocating silence, from the approaching hooves, from the twisted bleating, from the thing that has hunted me in the heart of the woods. And then, through the trees that now seem to writhe and twist like living nightmares, through the deepening, suffocating shadows that claw at the edges of my vision, through the oppressive, distorted silence broken only by the twisted bleating and the approaching hooves, to the overwhelming, nauseating, tainted musk that fills my lungs and coats my skin and steals my breath. I see it, no longer flickering at the edge of my flashlight beam, no longer a shape in the shadows, no longer a distant, unseen presence, but here, directly in front of me, stepping out of the trees, out of the shadows, into the weak, trembling beam of my flashlight, into the edge of the small clearing, into my direct line of sight, into my very soul. And I see it clearly, impossibly, terrifyingly clearly, and the blood in my veins turns to solid ice, freezing my heart and my chest, stopping time itself, and the breath freezes in my lungs, a strangled gasp trapped in my throat, stealing the air from my body, leaving me paralyzed, suffocating, utterly helpless. And the scream of pure, unadulterated terror that rises from the depths of my being, that claws at my throat, that threatens to shatter the oppressive silence, dies stillborn in my throat, choked by a terror so profound, so absolute, so primal that it steals my voice, steals my will, steals my very soul. Because it's not a bear, not a bobcat, not a mountain lion, not any animal of this world, not anything natural, not anything I recognize in the realm of human understanding, not even anything living as I understand life. It's something else, something ancient, something unclean, something monstrous, something inhuman. It's tall, impossibly tall, looming over me like a nightmare-given flesh, casting a shadow that swallows the clearing whole, blotting out the last vestiges of light. Man-shaped, yes, vaguely, distantly, mockingly man-shaped in a grotesque, distorted parody of humanity, a mockery of the human form twisted into something obscene and unnatural. But not man, never man, covered head to toe in coarse, matted fur, not brown, not black, but shadow-colored, absorbing all light, seeming to ripple and ride even in the suffocating dimness, a living darkness given form. Walking upright, yes, but with a strange, unnatural, unsettling gait, a loping, predatory stride that speaks of inhuman power and ancient malice. And the legs, not human legs, no, not animal legs I recognize from any creature of this world, bent backwards at unnatural angles, impossibly jointed, ending not in feet, not in paws, but in hooves, cloven hooves, black and polished, split and cracked, clicking and scraping softly, rhythmically, deliberately on the forest floor, like bone on stone, like the ticking of a death clock counting down to my final moment. And the head, human-shaped, vaguely, distantly, mockingly human-shaped, yes, but elongated, bestial, stretched and distorted into a grotesque parody of human face. The skin stretched taut and thin over sharp, jutting bone. The nostrils flare and wet, twitching with predatory hunger. The mouth a thin, cruel, bloodless line pulled back in a silent, anticipatory snarl, revealing teeth too long, too sharp, too inhuman. Rows of pointed fangs designed not for chewing, but for tearing, for rending, for devouring, and coarse. Black for sprouting not just from the brow, but from the cheeks, from the jawline, from the very lips themselves, obscuring the monstrous parody of human face, leaving only the eyes, pointed, twitching ears pricked forward, listening, sensing, hunting, catching every tremor in the air, every frantic beat of my terrified heart. And horns, curving, black as midnight, wickedly sharp, impossibly long, spiraling back from its temples like instruments of torture, catching the faint, trembling beam of my flashlight and reflecting it back with an unnatural inner luminescence, a cold, predatory gleam that speaks of ancient power and unspeakable evil. And the face, shadowed, bestial, monstrous, yet disturbingly, unsettlingly, terrifyingly human around the eyes. Eyes that gleam in the encroaching darkness with a cold, predatory, knowing intelligence that chills me to the very core of my being. Eyes that are fixed, unblinkingly, relentlessly, hungrily on me, watching me, studying me, judging me, and recognizing me, not as a ranger, not as a human, but as prey, and in their fathomless, predatory depths. I see a flicker of something else, something far more terrifying and pure, monstrous evil, something familiar, something human, twisted, corrupted, lost beyond redemption. And in that flicker of lost humanity, I see my own reflection, my own monstrous becoming reflection, and I know, with a certainty that transcends terror, that obliterates hope, that silences even the scream in my throat. It's not just coming from me, it's coming from me. I never should have agreed to go camping in those woods. Ever since I heard the locals whisper about them, I felt a shiver run down my spine. They called it the Whispering Pines, a seemingly serene forest that had a dark reputation. Tales of missing hikers, strange sounds echoing at night, and a cabin that was said to be cursed. Despite the warnings, my friends and I thought we were invincible. We packed our gear and drove out to the woods, excitement bubbling in our chests. The sun was setting as we set up camp, the trees casting long shadows over our makeshift site. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but the deeper we ventured, the more the woods seemed to come alive around us. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. But I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying faint whispers that beckoned me to listen closely. Just the wind, I told myself, but there was something unsettling in the air. After a few hours, my friends decided to explore deeper into the woods, urging me to join them. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. "Let's find that cabin," Jake suggested, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "It'll be fun." With a mix of excitement and dread, we ventured into the darkness, our flashlights cutting through the thick fog that had rolled in. The deeper we walked, the more the atmosphere shifted. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their twisted branches forming grotesque shapes. The whispers grew louder, almost forming words, but I couldn't quite make them out. After what felt like hours of wandering, we stumbled upon the cabin, a decrepit structure hidden beneath a canopy of vines and moss. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung ajar, creaking ominously in the breeze. "This is it," Jake exclaimed, pushing the door open with a loud groan. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the beam of our flashlights, and the floorboards creaked beneath our feet. The walls were lined with strange markings, symbols I couldn't recognize. Sarah said, "This place gives me the creeps," her voice shaky. We explored cautiously, each room revealing artifacts of a life long forgotten. Old photographs, broken furniture, and a fireplace filled with ash. But there was something else, something darker lurking in the corners of the cabin. I felt an inexplicable urge to leave, but my friends were too engrossed in their exploration. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back room. We jumped, hearts racing. I whispered, "What was that?" my instincts screaming for us to get out. We moved toward the noise, the air growing colder with each step. As we entered the back room, the atmosphere shifted entirely. Shadows danced along the walls, and an oppressive weight settled over us. In the center of the room stood an old mirror, its surface dark and cracked. I felt drawn to it, an irresistible pull that made my heart pound. "Don't look into it," I warned, but my voice felt distant. Jake stepped closer, mesmerized. "It's just an old mirror. What's the worst that could happen?" I wanted to scream for him to stop, but the words wouldn't come. As he reached out to touch the glass, a chill swept through the room, and the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices. "Get out, leave now," they pleaded, but it was too late. The mirror began to ripple, shadows swirling within it like a storm. Jake's reflection twisted, a grotesque version of himself with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. "Help me," he cried, but it was a hollow plea. In a panic, I grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back. "We have to go. Now!" We turned to flee, but the cabin seemed to shift around us, the walls closing in, trapping us in a nightmarish labyrinth. The whispers grew louder, echoing our fears, drowning us in a sea of despair. We rushed through the rooms, frantically searching for an exit, but every door led us back to the mirror. I could feel the darkness closing in, its tendrils wrapping around my mind, whispering secrets of despair and hopelessness. Sarah screamed, "We're never getting out," her voice cracking. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I remembered the symbols on the walls. I had seen one of them in a book about ancient rituals. I shouted, "The mirror! We have to break it!" Desperation fueling my courage. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I grabbed a heavy chair and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, and a blinding light erupted from the shards. The darkness howled in rage, the whispers turning into screams as the shadows recoiled, releasing us from their grasp. We stumbled outside, gasping for air, the night sky sprawling above us like a blanket of stars. The woods felt different now, quieter, as if the malevolent presence had been banished. We didn't stop running until we reached our campsite, collapsing on the ground, hearts pounding. As dawn broke, casting light through the trees, I looked back at the woods, knowing the cabin was still there, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to wander in. We had escaped the cabin of endless nightmares, but I knew it would forever haunt my dreams, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the light. The forest trail is beautiful today. Early autumn, I think. Or maybe late summer clinging on. The sunlight, what little of it filters through the dense canopy above, is a warm, honeyed gold, dappling the path ahead in shifting coins of light and shadow. The air is crisp, cool against my skin, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It's a good day for a hike. A day for solitude. That's what I'm seeking. Anyway, just to be alone with my thoughts, to let the quiet of the woods settle over me. Each step crunches softly on the bed of pine needles that carpets the trail. A robin calls somewhere deeper in the trees, a cheerful, lilting melody. Further off, I could hear the faint murmur of a stream, hidden somewhere in the deeper woods. It's peaceful, exactly what I needed, just the rhythm of my own breathing. The sound of my boots on the path, the gentle sound of forest around me. Solitude, it starts subtly, almost too subtle to notice at first. A faint sound, just at the edge of hearing. A rhythmic something. I pause, listening. Just the wind in the branches above, the rustle of leaves. Probably just my imagination. Out here alone, your ears can play tricks on you. I start walking again, dismissing it. But then there it is again, faint rhythmic, like footsteps behind me. Impossible. I haven't seen another soul on this trail all morning. It must be an animal, a deer maybe, or just the echo of my own steps bouncing off the trees. That must be it. Echoes. I walk on a little faster now, just to test my echo theory. My boots crunch a little louder on the path. And yes, the sound behind me, it speeds up too, rhythmic, pace with my own steps. Footsteps, definitely footsteps. But still, no one there. I glance over my shoulder, quickly, casually, just trees. Shadows, empty trail stretching back behind me, disappearing around a bend. Nothing. It must be an animal. A fox maybe, padding silently on the leaves. But animals don't keep pace like that. And these footsteps, they sound too regular, too human. Unease starts to prickle at the edges of my calm. I stop walking abruptly. Silence. Just the wind whispering through the trees. I wait, holding my breath, listening intently. Nothing, no footsteps, just the quiet of the woods. See? Imagination, just the woods playing tricks. I start walking again, deliberately slower this time, and almost immediately there it is again, faint rhythmic, pace of my own steps. Footsteps, always the same distance behind. Not catching up, not falling behind. Just there, following. My heart rate quickens, just a little, a tightness in my chest. I tell myself it's nothing, just my mind playing games. But the feeling of being watched, of being followed, it's growing stronger with every step. It's not just a sound anymore. It's a presence. Something behind me. Who is it? What is it? Is someone actually back there, hidden in the trees, deliberately tracking me? Why? What do they want? My mind races, trying to find a rational explanation. But logic starts to fray at the edges of fear. It's too consistent, too paced, too intentional to be an animal or an echo. I have to know. I have to see. I have to confront whoever is back there. I stop walking again, abruptly, and this time I turn, quickly, spin around on my heel, facing back down the trail. Silence, visual silence. The trail behind me is empty, starkly, utterly empty. Just a path winding back into the trees, dappled sunlight, shadows stretching long and still. No movement, no sign of anyone, no animal, nothing, just emptiness. But the feeling of being watched, it's still there, stronger now. Somehow, even though I see nothing, I feel eyes on my back, unseen eyes, and the silence itself, it feels heavy, charged, like the air is holding its breath. The footsteps are gone, yes, but the presence, it hasn't vanished. It's still here, just unseen, just behind, always just behind. Slowly, reluctantly, I turn back around, facing forward on the trail again. I hesitate for a moment, then start walking. Each step feels heavy now, leaden. The peaceful solitude is gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I don't hear the footsteps immediately. For a moment, a sliver of hope. Maybe it was just my imagination after all. Maybe, but then, so faint I almost miss it. So subtle it blends into the rustling leaves. There it is again, the faintest rhythm. Footsteps, behind me, still keeping pace. Always just behind. And I know, with a chilling certainty that settles deep in my bones, they will be there for the rest of the hike. Unseen, unheard, perhaps if I try to ignore them, but always just behind. On this endless trail, in these silent woods, always following. The clock on the wall ticks with a loud, deliberate thump. Each second feels like a hammer blow in the silence of the gas station. 3 a.m., deep into the graveyard shift. Outside, the highway is empty, just the occasional ghost-like rush of a truck passing in the distance, swallowed quickly by the vast, indifferent darkness. Inside, it's just me. The relentless hum of the fluorescent lights that cast everything in a sickly, sterile glow, and the low, constant thrum of the refrigerators, a mechanical heartbeat in the dead of night. Another hour until dawn. Another hour of this echoing emptiness. Nights are always slow here. especially weeknights. Most of the time, it's just waiting, wiping down the already spotless counter, obsessively rearranging the candy bars, their bright colors garish under the harsh lights, staring out the empty pumps, watching the digital minutes on the clock crawl by with agonizing slowness. Sometimes a late-night trucker, weary-faced and silent, will materialize for coffee and fuel. Sometimes, someone driving home from somewhere, eyes glazed, movements heavy and disconnected, but mostly silence. Just the hum, the thump, and the vast, echoing silence pressing in from all sides. The bell above the door jingles, a sudden, sharp intrusion that shatters the heavy stillness like broken glass. I look up jolted, heart skipping a beat. Someone actually here, at 3 a.m, in the middle of nowhere. I force myself to straighten up, pasting on a polite, tired smile that feels brittle and false even to me. Welcome in. The figure in the doorway pauses for a long moment, silhouetted against the impenetrable darkness outside. Impossibly tall, it seems, framed against the night, wearing a long, dark coat that swallows their shape. Even though the air in here is stale and overheated, not cold at all. They step inside and the bell jingles again behind them, a strangely loud, echoing sound in the vast silence. They move slowly, deliberately, each step measured and precise, like they're wading through water or pushing against an invisible resistance. They come further into the light, and I get a better look. It's a man. Yes, tall, impossibly so. Pale, disturbingly pale. His skin almost translucent, stretched tight over sharp bones, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light in a way that makes him seem unreal. His face is thin, angular, all sharp lines and hollows, with prominent cheekbones and deep-set eyes that are swallowed by shadow under a heavy, low brow. He's not looking at me. Not yet. He's looking around, slowly, deliberately, scanning the aisles with those shadowed eyes, his head turning in small, unnatural, jerky movements, like a mechanical doll. And he's utterly still otherwise. No fidgeting, no breathing that I can see, just that slow, unsettling scan of his surroundings. He finally turns his head toward me, with that same slow, deliberate motion, like a machine grinding into gear. His eyes are still shadowed, but I can sense they are dark, bottomless pits of darkness. And they don't quite seem to focus. They drift unfocused, not meeting my gaze directly, but passing over me, around me, through me, like he's looking at something just beyond my perception, something in the very fabric of the gas station itself, or perhaps at nothing at all. He doesn't say anything, just stands there, impossibly still, in the middle of the aisle, his dark, unfocused eyes drifting, his long coat hanging like a shroud around his motionless form. The silence stretches, thickens, becomes almost palpable, pressing against my ears, stealing the air from my lungs. The ticking clock on the wall seems to amplify, each thump resonating through the oppressive quiet, a morbid heartbeat counting down to something unknown, something unwelcome. Thump, thump, thump. Can I help you? I ask again, my voice cracking slightly, sounding too loud, too strained, too desperate in the echoing space, too eager to break the silence, too nervous to endure it any longer. I try to force the brittle smile to remain in place, but it feels frozen now, a grotesque mask plastered on my face, utterly unnatural. He blinks once, slowly, deliberately, like an ancient machine powering up after centuries of dormancy, like he's just registered my presence, just remembered I exist. His head turns toward me again, that same slow, jerky, mechanical movement. And then he speaks, finally. His voice is wrong, low, breathy, barely more than a whisper, yet somehow resonant, echoing, as if amplified from some vast, hollow chamber deep inside him. a voice that seems to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my bones. Fuel, he says, just that one word, drawn out, elongated, each syllable stretched and distorted. Fuel. But the way he says it, it's not a question, not a request. It's a pronouncement, a flat, toneless, unsettling pronouncement from something not quite human. Fuel. Pumps are open. I manage to stammer, gesturing again, more frantically this time, toward the windows, toward the brightly lit pumps, the mundane reality of gasoline and highway travel. Which pump are you at? Clutching at routine, desperately trying to inject normalcy into this impossible encounter, trying to ignore the icy tendrils of fear that are now coiling around my heart. He doesn't move, doesn't even glance toward the pumps. Just keeps standing there, impossibly still and pale, those dark, unfocused eyes drifting, his long coat hanging motionless, like an empty skin draped over a void. Then he speaks again, that same wrong, breathy, echoing whisper. Not for the car. He says the word stretched and distorted again, unsettlingly inhuman. Fuel for later. Later? I repeat, my voice barely a croak now, the word catching in my throat. You mean gas cans? We have some in aisle 3, over there. I point again, more desperately this time, toward the back of the store, away from him, wanting to create distance to break the oppressive stillness of his presence. Try to fill the suffocating silence with meaningless words. He doesn't react to my words, doesn't acknowledge my gesture, doesn't even seem to register my existence beyond some vague, unfocused awareness. Just keeps standing there, still and pale and impossibly tall, his dark eyes drifting, his long coat hanging like a shroud. Then, with agonizing slowness, he raises one hand. Pale, unnaturally long fingers, like bone and stretched skin, emerging from the deep shadow of his coat sleeve. He points, not at the pumps, not the gas cans. He points directly at the refrigerators, at the brightly lit rows of chilled drinks, humming softly in the oppressive silence. Later, I repeat, my voice barely a croak now, the word catching in my throat. You mean gas cans? We have some in aisle 3, over there. I point again, more desperately this time, toward the back of the store, away from him, wanting to create distance to break the oppressive stillness of his presence. Try to fill the suffocating silence with meaningless words. He doesn't react to my words, doesn't acknowledge my gesture, doesn't even seem to register my existence beyond some vague, unfocused awareness. Just keeps standing there, still and pale and impossibly tall, his dark eyes drifting, his long coat hanging like a shroud. Then, with agonizing slowness, he raises one hand. Pale, unnaturally long fingers, like bone and stretched skin, emerging from the deep shadow of his coat sleeve. He points, not at the pumps, not the gas cans. He points directly at the refrigerators, at the brightly lit rows of chilled drinks, humming softly in the oppressive silence. Fuel. He whispers again, that same wrong, elongated, echoing sound. I stare at him, blankly, my mind struggling to grasp, to comprehend, to find any flicker of sense in this impossible request. Refrigerators, drinks, cold fuel? What is he talking about? Is this some kind of elaborate, cruel joke? Is he something else entirely? But his face is utterly blank, an emotionless mask of pale skin and shadow. Those dark eyes are unfathomable, depthless, reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. There's no humor there, no threat even. No, anything recognizable. Just emptiness. A terrifying alien emptiness. You want a drink? I ask, the words barely audible, a dry rasp in my throat. Like soda? Juice? Water? They're all cold. They're all right there. Stupid, useless words. Meaningless sounds in the face of this impossible, unfolding reality. He nods again, that same slow, almost imperceptible nod at his head under the obscuring shadow of his hat. Cold, fuel. He repeats that same breathy, echoing whisper, stretching the words into something alien and incomprehensible. For the long road. He starts to move then, finally, after what feels like an eternity suspended in silence and dread. Slowly, deliberately, he turns his impossibly tall, pale form and walks toward the refrigerators, his long coat swaying slightly around him with each measured, waiting step. He moves with that same unnatural motion, like he's pushing through something unseen, something viscous and resistant, the air itself solidifying around him. He stops in front of the refrigerated drinks, his back to me now, that long coat concealing him like a shroud. Still motionless, still utterly silent. I watch him, frozen behind the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, a cold, not pure, primal dread tightening in my stomach, stealing my breath, paralyzing my limbs. What is he going to do? What does he want? Cold fuel? For the long road? It doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. And the way he looks, the way he moves, that voice that isn't quite a voice, that stillness that isn't quite stillness, that emptiness that feels like it could swallow the world. The clock on the wall thumps again, each thump echoing through the vast silence, each second stretching into an eternity of dread. Thump, thump, thump. The relentless hum of the fluorescent lights seems to intensify, filling the oppressive silence, pressing it on me, suffocating me, amplifying a feeling of being utterly trapped, utterly alone. And I am alone here, completely, utterly alone, with him, with the customer at 3 a.m., and I have no idea what he is, or what he wants, or what he's going to do next. But I know, with a chilling certainty that settles deep in my soul, colder than the water in the cave, darker than the woods at midnight, more absolute than the silence itself, whatever it is, it won't be good. Not good at all. Cave diving is unlike anything else. It's a different world down there. A world of absolute darkness, of echoing silence, of water so cold it clenches around your chest, stealing your breath even to the thick neoprene. But it's a beautiful world, too. Alien, yes, but beautiful in its stark, mineral way. The slow drip of water sculpting stone over millennia. The hidden pools reflecting your lamplight like liquid mirrors, the sense of venturing into the Earth's hidden heart. This cave system was known for its intricate passages, its clear, cold water and its challenges, tight squeezes, deep drops, complex navigation. That's what drew me in, the thrill of exploration, the test of skill, the sense of pushing into the unknown. I was experienced, well-equipped, cautious, or so I thought. The initial descent was exhilarating. The weightlessness of the water, the beam of my headlamp cutting through the darkness, revealing the sculpted rock walls, the glint of mineral deposits, the sense of being utterly alone, yet connected to something vast and ancient. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft sound of my regulator and the gentle splash of my own bubbles rising to the unseen ceiling above, peaceful in a strange, otherworldly way. I followed the main passage deeper, navigating through increasingly narrow sections, enjoying the subtle shifts in the cave geology, the way the water flowed and swirled. There was a side passage I wanted to explore, a smaller tunnel branching off to the left, marked on the survey map as unstable section. Proceed with extreme caution. Of course, that was the one that truly called to me. The edge of the known, the hint of danger. I entered the side passage. Immediately, it felt different, tighter, more confined. The water seemed colder, a deeper, bone-chilling cold that seeped into my suit. The darkness pressed in, absolute and suffocating. The rock walls closed around me, and I had to exhale, forcing my chest in, to squeeze through the narrowest points. But the passage continued, and the thrill of exploration, that foolish, reckless thrill, pushed me onward. I told myself I would just go a little further, just to see what was around the next bend, just a little further. And then the rumbling started, a low, deep vibration that resonated through the water, through the rock itself, through my very teeth. At first, I thought it was distant thunder, somehow audible even deep underground. But then it grew louder, closer, more violent, shaking the very water around me. The water around me started to churn, clouding with gritty sediment, stinging my eyes. Small rocks began to fall from the cave's ceiling, bouncing off my helmet, pattering around me like an underwater hailstorm. I knew instantly. Cave in, and I was in the wrong place. The unstable section, deep inside the mountain. Panic flared, cold and sharp as the water itself. I turned to retreat, to claw my way back to the main passage, to escape. But even as I turned, the rumbling intensified, becoming a deafening roar that filled my head, blocked out all thought. The ground beneath me, the rock around me, shuddered violently, and then the mountain moved. The world collapsed. Darkness. Complete, absolute, crushing darkness. The beam of my headlamp was swallowed instantly, choked by dust and debris swirling in the water. The roar of the cave-in vanished as abruptly as it began, replaced by a ringing silence that hammered against my eardrums, even through the thick hood of my wetsuit. I couldn't see anything. Couldn't hear anything but the frantic, desperate rush of my own breathing, amplified in the sudden, tomb-like silence. My chest burned, lungs screaming for air, each breath feeling thinner, shallower. Disoriented, I kicked blindly backwards, pushing against the unseen resistance of the water, trying to retrace my path, to find a way out. But the passage, it was gone. Blocked. Solid, unyielding rock and loose, shifting rubble where the tunnel had been. I turned again, frantically, spinning the cold, murky water, kicking forward, hoping to find a way through, any way through. But it was the same in every direction. Darkness, debris, solid rock pressing in from all sides. No passage, no exit, sealed. The way of the mountain above me, pressing down, crushing hope. Trapped, the word slammed into my mind with the force of the cave-in itself. Trapped, here, in the dark, under tons of rock, underwater, alone, and the air getting thinner with every panic breath. The cold of the water now felt like liquid ice, seeping into my bones, stealing the last vestiges of warmth, numbing my limbs, making my movements clumsy, weak. The silence was crushing, a physical weight, broken only by the ragged, desperate sound of my own breathing. Each inhale and exhale shallower than the last. I checked my air gauge again, my hand clumsy with cold. Lower, lower than before. Dwindling rapidly now. Not much left. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Enough only to prolong the inevitable. Enough to watch the darkness close in, to feel the cold seep deeper, to hear the silence grow louder as the air runs out and the water stills. And the mountain claims me. Blackwood National Park. Even the name sounds old, doesn't it? Like something ripped from the pages of Grimm's fairy tale. A whispered warning in a children's story. And the woods, they live up to the name and to the whispers. Ancient trees, thicker than any you've ever seen. Their bark like wrinkled skin. Their branches reaching like skeletal, grasping fingers across trails that have been here for who knows how long. Centuries, maybe, before the park, before the rangers, before the roads that carved the wilderness. Even before the small, isolated town nestled nervously on the very edge of the woods, clinging to the fringes of civilization. These woods, they were here first. They remember things we've forgotten. Things we were never meant to know. Things that sleep beneath the soil and stir in the shadows and whisper on the wind. I'm Ranger Sarah Jenkins. Been working in Blackwood for 10 years now. A decade spent walking these ancient trails, breathing this cold, wild air, listening to the rustling secrets of the leaves. Love the woods, yes, in a way that borders on reverence, on something almost primal. Respect them deeply, instinctively. Feel at home here, in a way I never have anywhere else. A sense of belonging in the heart of the wild. But I'm a ranger, first and foremost, a scientist, a woman of logic and reason, trained to observe, to analyze, to explain the natural world through the lens of empirical evidence. I believe in facts, in biology, in ecology, in what I can see and touch and measure, in the tangible reality of the forest around me. Folklore, local legends, ghost stories whispered around dying campfires. Tales of creatures that lurk in the darkness and ancient pacts made in forgotten times. Charming, maybe in a quaint, rustic sort of way. Entertaining, sometimes, around a crackling fire on a cold night. But not real, not to be taken seriously by a rational mind. Not by me. Blackwood National Park. The locals, they call it tainted ground. Whisper stories about it. Old wives' tales and campfire spookings about things that walk in the deep woods. Things best left undisturbed. Goat men, they call them sometimes, or worse names. Names swallowed by the wind and the rustling leaves. Names that linger in the air like a cold breath on the back of your neck. Folklore, of course. Superstition. But even rangers, even those of us who pride ourselves on reason and science, can't entirely shake off the feeling, the weight of those old stories, especially when you're alone in the woods at dusk, and the shadows start to lengthen into grasping claws, and the trees begin to whisper secrets you don't want to hear, secrets carried on the wind from the heart of the ancient woods. The old families, the ones who've lived here for generations, their roots tangled as deep as the ancient trees themselves, their bloodlines intertwined with the very soil of Blackwood. They don't just whisper the stories, they believe them. They live by them, guided by ancient wisdom and ingrained fear. They fear them, these woods, these creatures, these packs. And their fear, it's contagious, a creeping, insidious thing. It seeps into the very soil of Blackwood, clinging to the bark of the trees like moss, riding on the wind like a tainted scent, whispering in the silence like a forgotten language. Today, I'm on routine patrol in the western sector of the park. a less traveled area, deeper in the woods, further from the marked trails, closer to the old, overgrown park boundary line. A line that the locals say is more than just a park boundary, a line that separates worlds. Checking for trail erosion after the recent autumn rains that have soaked the forest floor and turned the fallen leaves to a slick, treacherous carpet, making sure the old logging roads, relics of a bygone era, are still passable for emergency vehicles. Should the unthinkable happen, just routine maintenance. The mundane tasks that keep the wild at bay, that keep the park safe, that keep the darkness contained. But this part of the park, it feels profoundly different, older than time itself, quieter than any silence I've ever known, more intense in its stillness, in its ancient presence, in its unspoken secrets. The trees are larger here, impossibly tall, their trunks thicker than ancient redwoods, their branches more twisted and gnarled, reaching for the sky like supplicating arms, their shadows darker and deeper, swallowing the sunlight, creating pockets of impenetrable gloom even in the midday sun. The air is colder here, even in the crisp autumn sunshine, carrying a damp, bone-chilling chill that feels ancient, a cold that seeps into your marrow, that freezes your blood, that speaks of graves of forgotten things. The forest sounds are muted, almost hushed, as if the woods themselves are listening, waiting, holding their breath, anticipating something unseen, something unknown, something coming. And there's a stillness here, a profound, unsettling stillness that goes far beyond natural quiet, beyond the peaceful silence of the wilderness. A stillness that feels intentional, deliberate, aware. A stillness that feels watched, judged, measured. I'm following an old, overgrown logging road, barely more than a deer trail now, a faint scar on the ancient landscape, pushing through claustrophobic thickets of ferns that brush against my legs like cold, spectral fingers and fallen leaves that crunch underfoot with unnatural loudness. The oppressive silence broken only by the heavy crunch of my boots on the damp forest floor, each step echoing too loudly in the unnatural stillness. The occasional sharp snap of a twig underfoot, like a bone breaking in the silence. The distant, mournful call of a lone crow echoing to the towering trees. A lonely, desolate sound in the vast, expectant stillness. A sound that speaks of loss and warning, and something ancient and wrong in the heart of the woods. And then, through the trees, through the shadows, through the oppressive silence, I see it, just off the overgrown trail, almost completely hidden in a tangled mass of thorny vines and moss-covered, lichen-encrusted rocks, nestled at the base of an ancient gnarled oak. Something out of place in the natural world. Something man-made, yet impossibly old, impossibly ancient. Something wrong. Something calling to me. I push through the dense, thorny undergrowth, ignoring the sharp scratches on my hands and face, drawn by a sudden, inexplicable, almost compulsive curiosity, a feeling that this thing is not just important, but vital, that it needs to be investigated, not just observed, but touched, understood, that it's far more than just another piece of forgotten debris, another discarded relic of the park's long and shadowed history, but something significant, something powerful, something dangerous. And as I get closer, pushing aside the clinging vines, brushing away the obscuring moss, the shape resolves itself in the shadows, becomes clearer in the dim light filtering through the dense canopy, takes on a definite, unsettling primordial form. It's a marker, yes, undeniably a marker, standing sentinel in the heart of the woods, a boundary marker, but not like any park boundary marker I've ever seen in my 10 years of patrolling Blackwood. Not plastic, not metal, not modern, not human in its design or its intent. This is stone. Living stone, it seems almost organic in its texture and form. Rough-hewn, yes, but with an unnatural precision, like shaped by forces beyond human comprehension. Moss-covered, yes, but the moss itself is thick, black-green, almost pulsating with an unseen energy, like a living organism clinging to the ancient stone. Ancient looking? No, ancient, primordial, from a time, before memory, before humanity itself, standing about waist high, thick and solid, rooted deep in the earth, almost grown from the forest floor itself, an organic extension of the ancient woods, a silent, watchful sentinel in the heart of the wilderness, and carved into the face of the stone, almost completely obscured by the thick, pulsating moss and the creeping, lichen-encrusted surface, are symbols, not letters, not numbers, not runes, not glyphs, not anything I recognize from any human language, any known alphabet, any recorded history. Twisted lines that writhe and coil like living snakes, sharp angles that pierce the eye and the mind, circles and spirals that seem to draw you in, to hypnotize you, to steal your will, shapes that feel unsettlingly, disturbingly familiar, like echoes of something primal buried deep within the human psyche, something forgotten, something repressed, something otherworldly, something wrong. I circle the ancient stone marker slowly, cautiously, my heart pounding against my ribs with frantic, uneven rhythm, a cold prickle of unease no longer just crawling, but surging up my spine, a feeling that I've stumbled onto something not just significant, but forbidden, something I should not be seeing, should not be touching, should not even be near. Something dangerous beyond human comprehension. The air around the ancient marker feels palpably colder, heavier than the already chilled autumn air, pressing against my skin like an icy hand, charged with a strange, almost visible energy, a silent, humming vibration that makes the hairs on my arms stand on end, that whispers of forgotten rituals and ancient unknowable things, that speaks of power and dread and something ancient and wrong. The forest sounds, already muted, are now completely, utterly gone, swallowed by an absolute, unnatural, predatory silence that presses in on me from all sides, stealing my breath, stealing my thoughts, leaving my mind blank, my senses overwhelmed, my body trembling with a primal fear I cannot name, cannot rationalize, cannot control, leaving only the faint, unsettling hum in the air, now rhythmic, insistent, like a slow, ancient, angry heartbeat and the frantic, terrified pounding of my own, hard in my ears, a desperate drumbeat against the encroaching silence. And then in the suffocating stillness, in the oppressive silence, in the chilling, ancient air, I remember the stories, the local legends, the whispered warnings of the old families, the hushed tones, the averted eyes, the ingrained fear, the warnings about the old ways, about respecting the balance, about leaving certain places in the woods untouched, unmarked, unviolated, places marked by stones, boundary stones, ancient boundary stones, markers not of park boundaries, not of property lines, not of anything human or rational, but of something else entirely, markers of packs, markers of limits, markers of danger, markers of the forbidden. The stories, they surge back into my mind now, unbidden, unwelcome, insistent, overwhelming, no longer just whispers, but shouts in the silence of my thoughts, rising from the forgotten depth of my memory, fragments of overheard conversations, snippets of local lore, warnings dismissed as superstition, as quaint local nonsense, now coalescing into a terrifying, undeniable truth. Whispers from old-timers at town meetings, averted glances and hushed tones in the local diner, fragments of forgotten folklore unearthed from dusty library books, all converging, all screaming the same terrifying message. These woods are not just woods. These woods are different, fundamentally, irrevocably different, older than time, deeper than darkness, tainted by something ancient and unclean. Stories about a time, before humanity claimed dominion over the earth, when the woods weren't just woods, but something more, something alive in a way we can no longer comprehend. Stories about creatures that dwelled in the deepest, most untouched parts of the forest, creatures that weren't animal, weren't human, but something in between, something otherworldly, something ancient. Stories about pacts made with these creatures, ancient, forgotten agreements forged in blood and shadow, pacts to keep the balance between worlds, to respect the old ways, to leave certain areas of the woods sacred, forbidden, untouched by human hands. Stories about boundary markers, stones like this one, placed long ago by hands not human, by forces not natural, to delineate the borders between the fragile, fleeting human world and their world, the ancient, primal, hungry world of the wild. Stories about consequences for those foolish enough to disrespect the pact, for those arrogant enough to cross the boundary, for those reckless enough to disturb the balance between worlds, to awaken something that should remain sleeping. Stories about a creature, a guardian of the boundary, an enforcer of the pact, a punisher of transgressors, a being of fur and shadow and cloven hooves and ancient malice, that protects the boundary with a terrifying ferocity, that emerges from the deepest, darkest heart of the woods to claim those who trespass, to drag them into the shadows, to make them pay the ultimate price for their arrogance, their disrespect, their transgression. Stories about a goat man, a creature of nightmare and folklore and ancient primal terror, a creature that waits for those who dare to cross the line. Superstition, nonsense, folklore, just stories whispered in the dark to frighten children and keep foolish hikers on the marked trails. Just local legends, quaint and harmless, nothing more than echoes of forgotten past, right? There's no such thing as pacts with ancient creatures. There's no such thing as guardians of the wild. There's no such thing as goat men. It's just a stone, an old moss-covered stone marker. Probably just an old property line marker from before the park was established, overgrown and forgotten by time. Nothing more than a geological curiosity, a historical artifact, a piece of inanimate rock in the middle of the woods. Nothing to be afraid of, nothing to respect beyond its historical significance, nothing to fear, right? But the stories, they cling to my mind like shadows, refusing to be dismissed, refusing to be silenced, no longer just whispers, but screams in the silence of my thoughts, persistent, overwhelming, casting a long, icy shadow over my carefully constructed wall of rational thought, whispering insidious doubts in the oppressive silence of the woods, planting seeds of primal terror in the fertile ground of my deepest instincts. And the stone, it feels undeniably different. It radiates not just coldness, but malevolence. It emanates not just age, but ancient power. It exudes not just presence, but something else, something darker, something unclean, tainted, wrong in a way that defies logic and reason, and everything I thought I knew about the natural world. And the silence, it's not just natural forest silence, peaceful and calming. It's a silence that listens with an ancient, predatory awareness. A silence that waits with an unnerving patience. A silence that judges with an ancient, unforgiving malice. And the air, it's colder now, much colder, biting at my exposed skin like frost, seeping into my clothes like a chilling mist, penetrating to the very core of my being, carrying not just the ancient chill of the woods, but a new, tainted coldness, a cold that speaks of graves and forgotten things and something ancient and wrong stirring the darkness, carrying that unsettling hum, that ancient rhythmic resonance, that feeling of wrongness, contamination, violation. And the woods themselves, they feel different too, transformed in an instant from a familiar, comforting wilderness into something alien and hostile and aware. No longer just woods, trees and undergrowth and trails and shadows and sunlight filtering through the leaves, but something else, something awakened, Something listening with every rustle of leaf, every snap of twig, every beat of my terrified heart. Something watching from every shadow, every tree trunk, every patch of deepening gloom. Something waiting with an ancient, predatory patience for a sign, for a signal, for a transgression, for a victim. And they know, they sense it, they feel it, they understand it. They know that the boundary has been crossed, that the line has been violated, that the pact has been broken, that the balance has been irrevocably disturbed. And they respond with a silence that screams, with a coldness that chills the soul, with a scent that taints the air, with a presence that darkens the woods, and with a promise of retribution, inevitable retribution. But I am a ranger. I am not a child to be frightened by shadows and whispers and old wives' tales. I am not going to let superstition dictate my patrol, to turn me back from my duty, to paralyze me with irrational fear. I have a job to do, a part to protect, a boundary line to check, a responsibility to uphold. And this is just a stone, just a marker, just an obstacle in my path, just in my way. And the boundary line, according to my official park map, the line I am sworn patrol, the line I am duty-bound protect, it runs directly through this location, just beyond this ancient marker, just a few yards further into the deepening woods, into the encroaching shadows, into the heart of the forbidden zone. I need to check it. I must check it. I have to check it. I need to make sure it's still clearly marked, still properly maintained, still serving its purpose, whatever that purpose may be. I need to cross the boundary, just for a moment, just a step or two, just to verify the marker on the other side, to ensure the integrity of the park boundary, to fulfill my sworn duty. Just routine, just my job, just necessary, just no choice. I take a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force down the rising tide of icy, primal fear that threatens to drown my reason, trying desperately to ignore the insistent, screaming whispers of folklore and ancient warnings echoing in my mind, trying to rationalize away the overwhelming, paralyzing sense of dread that threatens to root me to the spot, to steal my will, to shatter my resolve. It's just a stone, just woods, just routine, just my job, just duty. I force my leaden legs to move, take a hesitant step forward, then another, deliberately, resolutely, placing my heavy, trembling boot firmly on the cold, moss-covered earth, right beside the ancient, forbidden stone marker, steeling myself against the icy touch of the ancient stone, against the suffocating weight of the oppressive silence, against the primal scream of warning in my soul. And then, I take the final, irreversible step. I step over it. I cross the boundary. I trespass into the forbidden zone. I violate the ancient pact. I ignore the whispered warnings of generations. I disturb the balance between worlds. I enter the place that is untouched, forbidden, sacred, tainted. And as my boot crosses the invisible yet undeniably real line, as I step beyond the ancient, silent sentinel, as I trespass into the heart of the forbidden space, into the territory of the unseen and the unknown, into the realm of ancient power and primal dread, the oppressive silence breaks. Not with a sudden, violent crash, not with thunderous bang, not with any dramatic, overt sound of supernatural fury, but subtly, insidiously, unnervingly, in a way that is far more terrifying than any overt display of power. The oppressive, expectant silence shifts. It deepens, yes, becomes even more profound, more absolute, more suffocating, pressing it on me from all sides like a physical weight, stealing my breath, stealing my will, stealing my very soul. But it changes in its very essence, in its fundamental nature. It takes on a new, terrifying quality, a quality of awareness, as if the silence itself is now sentient, listening, watching, judging, a quality of expectation, as if the silence is holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to occur, a quality of malice, as if the silence itself is now hostile, predatory, hungry, and the unsettling hum, that ancient rhythmic resonance, it changes too, subtly yet profoundly. It deepens, yes, becomes lower, more resonant, more ancient, vibrating in the very bones of the earth, echoing from the heart of the woods, resonating with a power that chills me to the core. But it changes rhythm, no longer just a hum, no longer just a resonance. It quickens, slightly, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably, irrevocably it pulses. Like a heartbeat, yes, but not a human heartbeat, not an animal heartbeat, but something else entirely. Slow, heavy, ancient, malevolent, and angry, pulsing with ancient rage, with primal fury, with an intent that is not just hostile, but predatory, vengeful, unstoppable. And the air, it changes again, subtly yet irrevocably transformed. It becomes colder still, biting at my skin with an unnatural frost that burns like fire, seeping into my clothes like a shroud, penetrating to the very marrow of my bones, freezing my blood in my veins, carrying not just the ancient chill of the woods, but a new, tainted, unclean coldness, a cold that speaks of graves and forgotten things, an ancient, malevolent power stirring in the darkness, carrying that unsettling hum, that ancient, rhythmic, angry resonance, that feeling of wrongness, contamination, violation, now amplified, intensified, overwhelming. And the woods themselves, they change to subtly, imperceptibly, yet undeniably, irrevocably transformed. They shift, they stir, they awaken from their ancient slumber, no longer just trees and undergrowth and shadows and sunlight, but something else entirely, something aware, something sentient, something hostile. They listen with every rustle of leaf, every snap of twig, every beat of my terrified heart, amplified 1,000-fold in the oppressive silence. They watch from every shadow, every tree trunk, every patch of deepening gloom, their unseen eyes burning with ancient malice. They wait with an ancient, predatory patience for the inevitable consequence, for the promised retribution, for the price to be paid for transgression. And they know, they sense my presence, my transgression, my fear. They feel the disturbance in the balance, the violation of the pact, the breaking of the ancient law. They understand with an ancient, primal knowing that transcends human comprehension, and they respond with a silence that screams of ancient malice, with a coldness that chills the very soul, with a scent that taints the air with primal dread, with a presence that darkens the woods and blots out the sun, and with a promise of retribution, inevitable, unstoppable, ancient retribution. And that retribution is coming. Immediately, as if summoned by my transgression, as if unleashed by the breaking of the ancient pact. I feel it, not just a profound change in the air, the silence, the woods themselves, the oppressive weight of ancient malice pressing down on me from all sides, but something internal, visceral, primal, a shift deep within my very being, a tremor in the core of my soul, a violation of my inner self. A prickling sensation erupts across my skin, like unseen thorns tearing my flesh, a tightening in my chest that steals my breath and crushes my lungs, a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline that floods my system like ice water, making my heart hammer against my ribs with frantic, terrified urgency, my breath catching ragged, panic gasps, my senses scream in primal, instinctive alarm, every nerve ending firing with raw, untamed fear. It's not just fear, not just human terror, not just rational apprehension. It's something deeper, more ancient, more fundamental. Something primal, instinctive, atavistic. A terror that echoes from the dawn of humanity. from a time when humans were prey and the woods were filled with gods and monsters and ancient unknowable things. A feeling that I have done something not just wrong, not just foolish, not just dangerous, but something forbidden, irreversible, catastrophic, something unforgivable. A feeling that I am no longer just observed, no longer just watched, no longer just judged, but something far worse. A feeling that I am being claimed, that I am being hunted, that I am being consumed, and that the woods themselves, the ancient, sentient, angry woods, are no longer just woods, but something else entirely, something alive, something hostile, something predatory, something inhuman, and they are coming for me. And then cutting to the oppressive, predatory silence, overriding the deafening pounding of my heart, the rasping, panic gasps of my breath, the frantic, silent screams of my terror-stricken soul. I hear it, faintly, distantly at first, but rapidly growing closer, louder, more insistent, carried on the chilling, tainted breeze, echoing with unnatural resonance through the suddenly hostile silence of the ancient woods. A sound that makes the blood in my veins turn to solid, glacial ice, that makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end like frozen needles, that makes a primal fear in my gut clench into a knot of absolute, paralyzing terror, a terror that steals my breath, steals my will, steals my very soul, a sound that is unnatural, twisted, wrong in its very essence, a sound that is coming closer with every agonizing heartbeat, with every stolen breath, with every frantic, silent scream, a sound that is hunting me through the darkening woods, tracking me through the oppressive silence, pursuing me with an ancient, relentless, inevitable purpose, a sound that promises pain, violation, transformation, and something far, far worse than mere death. Bleeding. A goat bleeding. Yes, undeniably, unmistakably a goat bleeding. But not just a goat bleeding. Not the bleeding of any earthly animal. But something twisted, mocking, inhuman in its resonance. A sound that echoes with unnatural clarity through the ancient trees. A bleeding that grates on the soul. That chills the blood. That speaks of mockery and malice and ancient, unknowable evil. A sound that promises not just death, but damnation. Bleeding. Louder now, closer now, echoing to the woods like a death knell, carried on a tainted wind, promising retribution, promising punishment, promising the goat man coming closer with terrifying speed, and with it inseparable from it, intertwined with it, amplified by it, a new sound, a heavier sound, a more rhythmic sound, a more menacing sound. A sound of something moving through the undergrowth with deliberate, measured steps, no longer distant, no longer faint, no longer unseen, but approaching rapidly, relentlessly, unstoppably. Not animal footsteps, not human footsteps, but something in between, something otherworldly, something ancient, something wrong, something walking, upright, yes, but with an unnatural gait, a loping, predatory stride that speaks of inhuman power and ancient malice. Something hunting me through the darkness, tracking me through the silence, pursuing me with an ancient, inevitable hunger. Something inevitable, something waiting, just beyond the trees that now writhe and twist like living nightmares. Just beyond the deepening shadows that claw at the edges of my vision, just beyond the ancient boundary marker that I so foolishly, so arrogantly, so fatally crossed, waiting for me because I crossed the line, because I broke the pact, because I disturbed the balance, because I ignored the warnings, because I dismissed the folklore, because I dared to trespass in the forbidden realm, and because the woods remember, and the woods punish with an ancient, unforgiving wrath. And the woods are coming for me, in the form of a bleeding in the woods, in the form of approaching hooves on the forest floor, in the form of something ancient and unclean and utterly, irrevocably inevitable, in the form of the goat man, and there is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no escape from the encroaching darkness, from the suffocating silence, from the deafening bleating, from the approaching hooves, from the ancient, predatory power that is now unleashed and hunted me through the heart of Blackwood National Park, only to wait and listen and watch and tremble as the bleating echoes louder, closer, more twisted, more mocking, as the hooves crunch closer, faster, more relentlessly, more inhumanly, as the ancient, rhythmic hum pulses deafeningly, menacingly, angrily, predatorily, as the musky, tainted scent intensifies, suffocates, consumes, and as it approaches from the heart of the ancient, awakened, hostile woods, something inevitable, something waiting just beyond the trees, waiting to claim me, waiting to punish me, waiting for me. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a chance to escape the chaos of city life and unwind at a secluded lake cabin my friends had rented. The sun hung high in the sky as we drove through the winding roads, laughter filling the car. I had no idea that beneath the glassy surface of the lake lay horrors waiting to awaken. As we arrived, the cabin looked quaint, nestled among towering pines. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a refreshing change from the city smog. We unpacked and settled in, excitement buzzing in the air. That evening, we gathered around a fire pit, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows under a blanket of stars. As darkness fell, the lake shimmered under the moonlight, its surface smooth and inviting, but something about it felt off, a deep, unsettling chill that made me shiver. "Let's go swimming," my friend Jake suggested, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Are you crazy?" I replied, glancing at the dark waters. "It's freezing." "Come on, live a little," he laughed, jumping into the water with a splash. The others followed, their joyous shouts echoing across the lake. I hesitated, but the thrill of the moment pulled me in. I couldn't let fear hold me back. I took a deep breath and plunged into the icy water. The shock was jarring, but I quickly adapted, swimming toward my friends. We splashed and joked, the cold forgotten in our laughter, but the feeling of unease lingered at the back of my mind. Then I noticed it, a shadow beneath the surface. It darted quickly just out of sight, and my heart raced. I called out, "Did you guys see that?" My voice tinged with panic. "What?" Jake laughed, splashing me playfully. "You're imagining things." "No, really. I saw something." I insisted, scanning the darkness below, but their laughter drowned out my concerns, and I reluctantly pushed it aside, trying to enjoy the moment. As the night wore on, we climbed out of the water, shivering and exhilarated. We gathered around the fire, the warmth seeping into our bones. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the depth of the lake. Later that night, while everyone else was asleep, I found myself unable to close my eyes. The lake whispered to me, beckoning me closer. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I slipped outside, drawn to the water's edge. The moonlight danced on the surface, but beneath it, the darkness seemed alive. "Just a quick look," I murmured to myself, kneeling at the water's edge. I peered into the depths, heart pounding, when suddenly I saw it again, a figure moving just below the surface. It was larger than I had imagined, and its shape twisted and turned like a serpent. Fear gripped me, and I stumbled back, my heart racing. I turned to run back to the cabin when I heard it. A soft, melodic voice calling from the depths. "Come to me." I froze, the voice wrapping around me like a tendril. I whispered, "What do you want?" My voice trembling. The water rippled, and the figure rose close to the surface, revealing a face, pale and haunting, with eyes that seemed to pull me in. "Help me," it pleaded, the voice echoing in my mind. I'm trapped beneath the surface. Panic surged through me, but an inexplicable urge tugged at my heart. "I can't help you," I stammered, backing away. The figure's expression darkened, and the surface of the water began to churn violently. "Please, you must," it cried, the water swirling into a tempest. I felt a pull, as if the lake itself was reaching for me, its icy fingers grasping at my ankles. "You're the only one." I shouted, "No!" fighting against a force that threatened to drag me under. I turned to run, but the lake roared in anger, waves crashing against the shore. The shadows beneath the surface writhed, and I realized I was not the first to hear the call. I sprinted back to the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest, but the whispers followed me. "Help us! Help us!" They echoed in my mind, a chorus of despair that chilled my soul. I burst through the door, waking my friends with a start. Jake asked, "What's wrong?" bleary-eyed and confused. I gasped, breathless. "Something's in the lake." "I saw it. We need to leave." "Calm down," he said, his voice laced with skepticism. "It's just your imagination." "No, I'm serious. There's something beneath the surface." I insisted, desperation clawing at my throat, but their laughter only deepened my fear, and I realized that I was utterly alone in this. As the night wore on, I could hear the whispers growing louder, the water thrumming with energy. I lay awake, fear gnawing at my insides, contemplating my next move. I was certain now that we were not safe. Whatever lurked beneath the lake wanted something from me. The following morning, I decided to confront my fears. I gathered my courage, and with a heavy heart, I convinced Jake and the others to join me for a swim. "We need to see what's really down there," I urged, trying to mask my terror. Reluctantly, they agreed, and we waded into the water. As we swam out toward the center of the lake, the feeling of dread intensified, and the surface seemed to ripple with anticipation. I could feel the dark presence lurking, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, the water beneath us began to churn violently, and the shadows surged upward, forming a massive shape that broke the surface. It was a grotesque creature, its body a twisted mass of limbs and eyes, glistening in the sunlight. I screamed, panic electrifying my body. "Swim back!" I shouted, but the lake roared in fury, the waves crashing over us. The creature lunged forward, its maw opening wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I felt a surge of terror, and instinct kicked in. I swam for my life. Chaos erupted as my friends screamed, flailing in the water. I glanced back, seeing the creature devouring one of them, its cries abruptly silenced. My heart shattered, but I couldn't look back. I fought against the waves, my lungs burning, desperation fueling my strokes. I reached the shore, collapsing onto sand, gasping for air. I turned back to the lake, the creature now submerged, its presence lingering beneath the surface like a dark omen. I had escaped, but at what cost? As the sun began to set, casting a crimson hue across the lake, I realized the truth. The voices would never leave me. The darkness beneath the surface would always lurk, waiting for the next moment of weakness to claim its next victim. And so, I fled the cabin, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and the memories of my friends. But the whispers of the lake would forever haunt my dreams, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lie beneath, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to answer their call. The night was drenched in an unsettling crimson glow as the blood-red moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie light over the small town of Millbury. I had heard the legends whispered in hushed tones, the tales of sacrifices made beneath the blood-red moon, of ancient rituals that promised power and prosperity. But those were just stories, right? Just folklore to scare children and keep them in line. I should have known better. As a journalist, I was drawn to the supernatural, the unexplained. When I received an anonymous tip about a gathering in the woods, I felt a thrill of excitement. This could be my chance to uncover the truth behind the legends. I grabbed my camera and set out into the night, the air thick with anticipation. The moon hung like a bloodstain against the velvet sky, illuminating the twisted branches of the trees. As I made my way deeper into the woods, a chill ran down my spine, and the whisper of the wind felt almost like a warning. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. As I approached the clearing, I heard the low murmur of voices. I crouched behind a thick bush and peered through the branches. There, in the moonlight, stood a circle of hooded figures, their faces concealed in shadow. They held candles that flickered like dying stars, casting eerie shadows on their robes. In the center of the circle lay an altar, and my heart sank when I saw the glint of metal, sacrificial knives glimmering in the moonlight. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, but I couldn't look away. The figures began to chant in unison, their voices rising and falling like a dark hymn. I fumbled for my camera, ready to capture the moment, but just as I pressed the shutter, a twig snapped beneath my foot. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the figures turned in unison, their heads tilting as if they could sense my presence. Panic surged through me. I turned to flee, but before I could take a step, a voice rang out, deep and resonant. "Come forth, seeker of truth." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. They knew I was there. I took a shaky breath and stepped into the clearing, my camera hanging limply at my side. I asked, "What do you want?" trying to keep my voice steady. The hooded figure who had spoken stepped forward, lowering their hood to reveal a face that was both beautiful and terrifying. "You seek answers, do you not? The blood-red moon calls to those who are lost, and you are here for a reason." I swallowed hard, my instincts screaming at me to run. I just wanted to understand the stories. "Stories are but echoes of the truth," the figure replied, their voice smooth as silk. "Tonight, we perform a ritual to appease the spirits of the forest, to ensure prosperity for our town. But we require a sacrifice." My breath quickened. "A sacrifice?" The figure nodded, eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "Your presence here is a sign. You were chosen." "Chosen?" I stammered, the weight of their words crashing down on me. "I'm not part of this." The other figures began to close in around me, their chanting starting again, more fervent this time. The air grew thick with tension, and I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. "You cannot escape your destiny," the figure said, raising a hand. In a burst of adrenaline, I turned and ran, dodging between the trees as the chanting intensified behind me. The blood-red moon seemed to pulse with every beat of my heart, illuminating my path, but also revealing the figures that pursued me. The forest was alive with their cries, echoing in the night like a twisted symphony. I could hear footsteps behind me, growing closer, a chilling reminder of my impending doom. I stumbled over roots and rocks, the darkness closing in around me. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I had to escape. Finally, I burst into a small clearing, the moonlight spilling over me like a blanket. I looked around frantically, searching for a place to hide. My eyes landed on an old, crumbling stone well at the edge of the clearing. Without thinking, I dove inside, the darkness enveloping me as I hit the bottom with a thud. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, heart racing, listening to the sound of the forest above. I could hear the hooded figures searching for me, their voices echoing like a haunting song. "She cannot hide from us," one whispered. "The blood-red moon demands her." The whispers faded, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they would give up and leave. But as I sat in the darkness, the ground beneath me began to tremble again, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the well, sending chills down my spine. Suddenly I heard it, the lullaby, soft and melodic, drifting down from above. It was the same haunting tune the figures had chanted, and it filled me with dread. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it seeped into my mind, echoing with a terrifying clarity. "Come to us," it sang, a voice both sweet and sinister. "Join us beneath the blood-red moon." I could feel the pull of the melody, wrapping around my thoughts like a vine. I fought against it, but the darkness was closing in, and I could feel my resolve weakening. The well felt suffocating, and I realized that I was trapped, not just in the well, but in the nightmare that had become my reality. In a moment of sheer desperation, I climbed to my feet and began to claw my way up the stone walls, determination fueling my every movement. I had to escape, had to break free from whatever fate awaited me. As I reached the top, the chilling lullaby crescendoed, and I felt hands gripping my ankles, pulling me down. With one final surge of strength, I broke free and tumbled out of the well, landing hard on the forest floor. I scrambled to my feet and ran. The moonlight guided my way as I dashed through the trees. The chilling lullaby faded behind me, but I could still feel the eyes of the figures watching, waiting for my return. I burst through the edge of the woods and into the town, gasping for breath. The blood-red moon loomed overhead, a constant reminder of the horrors I had encountered. I had escaped the ritual, but I knew I could never truly escape the darkness that lurked beneath its glow. From that night on, the blood-red moon would haunt my dreams, a chilling lullaby whispering in the shadows, reminding me that some stories should remain buried. Because beneath the blood-red moon, I was never truly free. It was a cold, misty evening when I found myself standing at the abandoned train station, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. The locals had warned me about the Midnight Express, a train that was said to run only once a year on this very night, carrying souls long lost. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I was determined to uncover the truth behind the ghostly legend. As the clock struck midnight, a low rumble echoed through the air, sending a shiver down my spine. I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet, and then through the thick fog, the train appeared, a magnificent steam locomotive, dark and imposing, its windows glowed with a ghostly light. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of dread creeping over me, but my curiosity propelled me forward. I climbed aboard the train, the door creaking open as if inviting me into its depths. The interior was dimly lit, adorned with plush velvet seats and ornate decorations that seemed frozen in time. I was alone, or so I thought. As I settled into a seat, a chill swept through the carriage, and I could sense an unseen presence lurking in the shadows. The train jolted to life, the whistle piercing the silence, and we were off, the tracks clattering beneath us. The scenery outside blurred into a haze of darkness, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. In the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure seated across from me, cloaked in shadows. "Are you the last passenger?" the figure asked, its voice a haunting whisper that sent chills down my spine. I nodded, trying to mask my fear. What is this place? "The train carries those who have unfinished business," it replied, its face obscured. "Tonight is a night of reckoning." As we sped through the night, I felt a strange energy enveloping me, a mix of excitement and dread. I leaned closer to the figure, desperate for answers. What happened to the people who ride this train? "They are bound to their regrets," it said. "Each stop reveals a piece of their past, and only when they confront their demons can they find peace." The train began to slow, and I could see a faint light glowing in the distance. "We're stopping," I realized, my heart racing. The figure nodded solemnly. As the train came to a halt, I glanced out the window and saw a familiar scene, a quaint little house surrounded by trees. It was my childhood home, a place I hadn't visited in years, filled with memories I had long buried. The door creaked open and a figure stepped out, my younger self, filled with innocence and hope. "Go to her," the shadowy figure urged. "You have something to resolve." With a deep breath, I stepped off the train and approached my past self. "What do you want?" she asked, her eyes wide with confusion. "I want to apologize," I said, my voice trembling. "I should have been there for you. I let fear guide my choices, and I abandoned the dreams we once had." The air shimmered around us, and I could feel the weight of regret pressing down on my chest. My younger self looked at me with a mix of sadness and understanding. "I know," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, "but it's too late." "No, it's not," I insisted, desperation fueling my words. "I can change. I can live for both of us. I can honor our dreams." Suddenly, the ground trembled and the world around us began to shift. The house faded into the mist, and the train whistle echoed in the distance. "You must choose," the shadow figure called out from the train. "Will you let go of your past, or will you remain forever haunted by it?" In that moment, I felt a surge of strength. I turned to my younger self and said, "I will live. I will chase our dreams and make them a reality. I promise you that." The mist swirled around us, and I could feel the warmth of acceptance enveloping me. My younger self smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. "Then go," she said softly. "You're free now." As the world around me dissolved, I felt a rush of energy, and I was back on the train, the shadowy figure watching me with a hint of approval. "You face your past," it said. "Now you can move forward." The train jolted, and we began to speed away, leaving behind the house and the echoes of my childhood. I turned to the figure, my heart racing. "What happens now?" I asked. "You are the last passenger," it replied, its voice a soothing whisper. "But your journey is just beginning." As the train roared through the night, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. The shadows that had once haunted me were now fading, replaced by a lightness in my heart. I had confronted my past, and in doing so, I found the strength to embrace the future. As dawn broke, the train slowed to a stop, and I stepped off onto solid ground, the sun rising in the distance. I turned back to look at the train, but it had vanished into thin air, leaving only echoes of its haunting presence behind. With newfound determination, I walked away from the station, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The Midnight Express had carried me through the darkness, but now I was free to write my own story, A story filled with hope, dreams, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. It was a typical Friday night, the kind that wrapped me in a comforting blanket of solitude. I nestled into my favorite chair, the flickering light of the TV casting shadows around the room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its sound harmonizing with the quiet hum of the night. I had just settled in with a bowl of popcorn when it happened. A sharp, piercing ring sliced through the silence. My heart raced as I glanced at the clock. 12:01 a.m. A call at this hour felt wrong, unsettling. I fumbled for my phone, the screen illuminating my face with an eerie glow. The caller ID read, unknown. A chill ran down my spine. I muttered, hesitating. Who could be calling me at midnight? Curiosity mixed with dread, urging me to answer. I pressed the green button, bringing the phone to my ear. Hello, I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice trembled. There was a long pause, the silence stretching like a taut string ready to snap. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard a soft, raspy whisper on the other end. Help me. My blood ran cold. I demanded, who is this? My heart pounding in my chest. Where are you? Please? I'm trapped. The voice pleaded, a hint of desperation cutting through the static. You have to listen. The darkness is coming for me. I glanced around my dimly lit room, shadows dancing across the walls. What do you mean? Who are you? I pressed, my mind racing. You have to find the key to stop it, the voice continued, panic rising. It's in the old house at the end of Willow Street. You must hurry. Then the line went dead, leaving me in a suffocating silence. I stood there, my heart thundering in my ears. The old house at the end of Willow Street? I had heard stories about it. Whispers of a dark history and the shadows that haunted its halls. A chill washed over me, but I felt an inexplicable pull, an urgency to uncover the truth. I grabbed my jacket, the cool fabric grounded me as I stepped outside. The night air was crisp, an unsettling stillness enveloping the neighborhood. I climbed into my car, the engine purring to life, and drove towards Willow Street. Each turn felt like a descent into darkness, the streetlights flickering ominously as if warning me to turn back. When I arrived, the old house loomed before me, its windows dark and lifeless, like vacant eyes watching my every move. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The air felt thick with tension as I approached the front door, its paint peeling and wood creaking under my touch. This is insane, I muttered, but I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was shrouded in darkness, dust motes dancing in the faint beam of my flashlight. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight, each sound amplifying the eerie silence. Where are you? I called, my voice echoing through the empty halls. The only response was a soft rustle of leaves outside, a haunting reminder of my isolation. I moved deeper into the house, scanning the walls for any sign of a key or something significant. My flashlight flickered, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to play tricks on my mind. I felt a creeping sensation, as if unseen eyes were watching me from the corners of the room. Suddenly, I noticed a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. My heart raced as I approached, the air growing colder with each step. I pushed the door open to reveal a small, dimly lit room filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. In the center, a dusty table sat, and on it lay an intricately designed box. Inside the box lay a simple key, glinting in the dim light, but as I picked it up, a low growl reverberated through the room, sending shivers down my spine. The shadows in the corners seemed to move, swirling together as if forming a dark figure. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice hissed, echoing from the shadows. "You've awakened what was meant to stay buried." I shouted, "What do you want?" clutching the key tightly, my voice shaking. "You'll pay for your curiosity," the voice growled, drawing closer. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in, suffocating. In a sudden rush of adrenaline, I darted for the door, yanking on the handle desperately. It wouldn't budge. I turned back, the figure materializing from the shadows, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. "Help me!" It mimicked in a twisted version of the voice from the phone, and I felt my resolve waver. But I couldn't let it win. I had to escape. With one last surge of strength, I slammed the key into the lock and twisted it with all my might. The door burst open, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. I didn't look back. I ran. I dashed through the house, racing toward the front door. I could hear the figure behind me, its laughter echoing off the walls, growing louder as I neared the exit. I burst through the door, sprinting into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't stop running until I was safely in my car, the engine roaring to life as I sped away from that cursed place. My heart raced, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. As I drove, I glanced at the key in my hand, realized it was more than just a key. It was a burden, a reminder of the darkness I had encountered. I swore then that I would never answer an unknown call again. But deep down, I knew the truth. The shadows don't just linger in old houses. They follow, waiting for the next curious soul to answer their midnight call. Silent Isle. Even the name whispered a warning. Eric had tried to ignore it, to dismiss the unease that prickled his skin as the supply ship churned away into the swirling mist, leaving him stranded on the jagged rock. But the island, thrusting like a broken tooth in the churning gray waters of the North Sea, felt wrong from the moment he stepped ashore. Miles from the mainland, perpetually shrouded in mist and lashed by relentless winds, Silent Isle was more than just isolated. It felt forsaken. The lighthouse, a stark white tower clinging precariously to the highest point, was not a beacon of hope here, but a lonely sentinel against something ancient and unknowable. Eric was a solitary man, yes. He sought quiet, found solace in solitude. But there was solitude, and then there was this. This island wasn't quiet. It was silent in a way that felt oppressive, a silence that seemed to listen back, a silence pregnant with unseen things. He had volunteered for remote postings before, but Silent Isle was different. There was a weight to the air here, a subtle vibration in the stone beneath his feet, a sense of something vast and patient stirring beneath the surface, something that had been here long before the lighthouse, long before humanity itself. He thought he craved quiet. He would soon learn that some silences are not empty, but full of dread, full of whispers, full of things that should remain undisturbed. The lighthouse was ancient, its stones cold and slick with perpetual, unnatural dampness. Even in the brief moments the sun dared to pierce the mist. The rhythmic sweep of the lamp, the mournful bellow of the foghorn, these sounds, meant to ward off danger, felt strangely futile here, swallowed by the vastness of the sea, mocked by the howling wind. Days bled into nights, indistinguishable in perpetual gloom, marked only by the endless, cyclical routine of tending the lamp, logging the increasingly erratic weather, listening to the radio crackle with distant, distorted voices from the mainland, voices that felt increasingly faint, increasingly dreamlike, like echoes from a world that was receding, forgetting him. Initially, the isolation was stark, yes, almost beautiful in its desolation. But beauty here was fragile, tainted by an undercurrent of unease. The routine offered a semblance of order, but the order felt increasingly brittle, threatened by something unseen. He read, he listened to the radio, but the words blurred, the music distorted, the voices faded, unable to penetrate the oppressive silence of the island. He watched the endless, restless dance of the waves, the ominous shifting patterns of the clouds, the wheeling flight of seabirds that cried with despairing note. He felt detached from the world, yes, but not at peace. It was a detachment born of fear, of a growing certainty that the world had already detached from him, leaving him stranded on this forsaken rock at the edge of something vast and terrifying. And as the days dissolved into weeks, as the autumn deepened into a premature, unnatural winter, a profound dread began to seep into his solitude, a cold, clinging dread that mirrored the increasingly violent sea and the ever-present, suffocating mist that clung to Silent Isle like a shroud woven from shadows and whispers. The nights were wrong. The darkness on Silent Isle was not just the absence of light, but a presence in itself, a thick, suffocating blackness that devoured the lighthouse beam, that seemed to press against the tower walls, to seep through the very stone, a darkness that felt ancient, aware, hungry. The wind howled like a chorus of tormented spirits, rattling the lantern room windows with furious intent, and the waves smashed against the rocks with relentless, earth-shattering force, their roar echoing up the tower, vibrating not just in his bones, but in his very soul. And in the brief, terrifying lulls between the gusts of wind, between the crashing waves, when the foghorn fell momentarily silent, he began to hear other sounds, no longer subtle, no longer dismissible. These were the sounds that the silence had been holding back, sounds that the wind and waves had been momentarily masking. Whispers, yes, but whispers with intent, whispers that coalesce into voices, voices that call from the sea, from the fog, from the darkness itself. Voices on the wind, no longer whispers, but voices. That was the undeniable horror. No longer faint, but insistent, demanding. Voices carried on a gust of wind, yes, but also within and part of it. Voices that spoke his name with chilling familiarity, that murmured words in a language that resonated with something ancient and primal within him, a language that felt both alien and intimately known, a language that whispered of depths and darkness and unseen things. He would be tending the lamp in the lantern room, the wind screaming around the tower, the foghorn bellowing its lonely, futile warning, and the voices would erupt in the brief lulls, no longer just at the edge of hearing, but pressing against his eardrums, invading his mind, voices that seemed to come from the sea itself, from the heart of the fog, from the very darkness that surrounded the island, voices that knew him, that called to him, that waited for him. He strained to understand, to decipher the maddening phrases, but they remained just beyond comprehension, frustratingly intelligible, terrifyingly close to meaning, just voices, just murmurs, just the wind. He tried to tell himself, but the reassurances rang hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence, by the encroaching dread, by the voices. But the voices persisted, intensified, multiplied. They were no longer just on the wind. They were everywhere, woven into the creaking of the lighthouse, the relentless crashing of the waves, the desperate pulse of the foghorn, even in the false silences between the sounds, a constant, underlying cacophony that seeped into his consciousness, that shattered his solitude, that made him feel not just watched, but consumed, possessed, utterly surrounded. He started to shout, to scream, to rage against the voices, to break the maddening chorus, to deny their reality, to cling to the last vestiges of his sanity. But the voices continued, indifferent to his desperate denials, persistent, patient, triumphant, closing in. Then, the lights ascended from the fog. No longer just fleeting glimpses, no longer just distant glows. These were presences luminous, malevolent intelligences that manifested in the mist, that coalesced into forms of pure light, forms that flickered, pulsed, shifted, writhed with unnatural energy, forms that watched the lighthouse with cold, calculating intent, that circled Silent Isle with predatory patience, that descended from the fog in slow, deliberate spirals, drawing closer, inevitably closer, in the suffocating darkness. He saw them from the lantern room, no longer questioning his sanity, no longer seeking rational explanations. The lights were real, horrifyingly real, and they were aware of him. They were drawn to him. They were coming for him. Sometimes single lights, like solitary eyes staring from the abyss. Sometimes clusters of lights, like constellations of malevolent stars descending from the heavens. Sometimes vast, shifting fields of luminescence that illuminated the fog with an unholy, otherworldly glow, revealing fleeting, terrifying glimpses of shapes in the mist, vast, amorphous forms that pulsed and writhed and reached with tendrils of light, shapes that defied human geometry, shapes that hinted at a reality beyond human comprehension, shapes that spoke of something ancient and infinite rising from the depths, encircling the island, claiming the darkness as their own. Objects move with purpose, with malice, no longer subtle shifts, no longer dismissible. Doors banged open and slammed shut with violent force. Heavy objects hurled themselves across the room, shattering against the stone walls. The lamp mechanism ground to a halt, plunging the lantern room into momentary darkness before restarting with a jerking, unnatural rhythm. The foghorn bellowing in agonized bursts, then falling abruptly silent, then erupting again with frantic, desperate cry, as if tortured by an unseen hand. He found objects arranged, reconfigured, repurposed in patterns that defied logic, that mocked human order, small stones and shells piled on the windowsills in impossible formations, forming symbols that resonated with chilling, unfamiliar meaning, as if someone knows something was not just communicating, but commanding, asserting its presence, claiming its territory, preparing to consume. He was beyond terror now. Terror had given way to a cold, an uncertainty of doom. The isolation was no longer a prison, but a tomb. The silence was no longer suffocating, but devouring. The voices, the lights, the moving objects, they were not just real, they were inevitable, unstoppable, and they were upon him, within him, consuming his sanctuary, annihilating his sanity, erasing his self. He was not alone on Silent Isle. He had never been alone. Something else was here, something ancient beyond reckoning, something vast beyond comprehension, something that had been waiting since before time began, something that had been watching, listening, hungering all along, and now, in the absolute darkness, in the final winter, it was awakened fully, terribly awakened. It was stirring within the depths. It was rising from the sea. It was reaching for him, claiming him, devouring him, body and soul. One night, the final night, the storm ascended. Not just a storm of wind and waves, not even just a storm of nature, but something beyond storms, something antediluvian, something unleashed. The wind became a conscious vortex, a malevolent entity tearing at the lighthouse with purposeful fury, determined to rip it from its ancient foundations, to cast it into the abyss. The waves became living mountains of black water, conscious leviathans crashing against Silent Isle with cosmic force, sending earthquakes through the stone tower, shattering the very bedrock of the island. The fog became a sentient entity, a swirling, suffocating nightmare of darkness filled with those unholy lights, Those maddening voices, those impossible shapes that writhed and shifted and reached with intent, with hunger, with the cold, infinite dread of the primordial void itself. And the lighthouse itself began to unravel, not swaying in the wind, but twisting, contorting, groaning in ways that defied physics, that mocked reality, as if something immeasurably vast and infinitely ancient was awakening not just beneath the island, but as the island, as the sea, as the very world around them, and the lighthouse humanity. Existence itself was merely a fragile, insignificant shell caught in its cosmic awakening tremors, destined to be shattered, consumed, erased. He was trapped, utterly, inescapably trapped in the lantern room, the glass imploding around him, the wind howling to the void where windows had been, the fog seething inside, consuming the air, the lights dancing with malicious glee in the swirling mist, the voices screaming his name, tearing his mind, devouring his soul, the rhythmic pulsing becoming a deafening, all-consuming heartbeat that seemed to resonate from the abyssal core of the island, from the primordial depths of the sea, from within his own shattered, non-existent mind. He saw them then, truly saw them, in the unholy, revealing light, in the sentient, devouring mist that had breached the lighthouse, invaded the lantern room. No longer just lights, no longer just shapes, but entities, primordial, impossible entities that coalesced from the fog, that erupted from the sea, that descended from the darkness itself, vast, grotesque, mind-shattering forms that writhed and shifted and reached for him with tendrils of pure shadow, with voices that were the language of the void, with the cold, infinite, devouring dread of the abyss made manifest. Ancient things, elder things, things from before time, things from beyond space, things that have been waiting since the dawn of creation, waiting patiently for a flicker of light to fail, for the whisper of solitude to deepen, for the fragile human mind to shatter, things that have been drawn to Silent Isle, to the lighthouse, to Eric by a cosmic, inescapable call, a call that resonated in the void between stars, in the silence between universes, in the darkness before existence itself. And then nothing, the light was not just extinguished, it never was, not just a lamp in a lighthouse, but all light, all hope, all sanity, all existence, annihilated in an instant that was longer than eternity, swallowed by the primordial, infinite, hungry darkness that had risen not just from the depths, but from the void beyond depths that claimed not just Silent Isle, not just Eric, not just a lighthouse, but reality itself, becoming one with the abyss, with the nothingness, with the unending silence at the edge of non-existence. And the foghorn, finally, eternally silent, its lonely, desperate bellow erased from memory, was replaced by no sound, by nothing, by the void. And yet, in the absence of sound, in the annihilation of sound, there remained a presence, a sense of something vast and unimaginably ancient, something beyond silence, something that was silence, something that hungered in the silence, something that waited in the silence, eternally, inevitably, for the next non-existent light to never flicker, for the next forgotten soul to never seek solace in the void, for the next unborn victim to never stumble into its infinite, devouring non-embrace, at the edge of non-reality.